She set the mug down on the counter. Careful, deliberate. The way you set something down when you need your hands free for what comes next. Outside, a truck sat at the curb with the engine still running. 2 men in the cab, waiting, and on the front walk a woman in a charcoal coat, checking her watch. Not knocking, not calling out, just standing there, certain. Helen looked down at herself. His flannel shirt, bare feet, hair unbrushed. She thought, this is how 31 years ends. Not with a conversation, with a schedule. She went to put on her shoes. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her husband had spent the last 7 months of his life making sure this moment would not break her. He had left her something, and it was already waiting. Constance Voss was already on the front walk when Helen opened the door. That was the thing she remembered afterward. Not the sound of the truck. Not the 2 men sitting in the cab waiting for a signal. Not the black sedan parked behind it with the engine still running. Constance, standing on the walk in her good charcoal coat, with her hands folded and her posture the posture of a woman who had made a decision and was not going to be talked out of it. She was checking her watch, the small gold one she wore on her left wrist. She checked it the way you check a watch when you already know what time it is, but want to confirm that the schedule is being kept. Helen stood in the doorway in Owen's flannel shirt and her socks and her unbrushed hair and looked at her mother-in-law on the front walk. Constance looked up. Something crossed her face. Not guilt exactly. The specific discomfort of a woman who has convinced herself she is doing the right thing and finds the doing of it harder than the convincing. Helen. Her voice was practiced. I hoped you'd be ready. Helen looked at the truck, at the 2 men, at Constance's watch going back to her side. She thought, this is how 31 years ends. Not with a conversation, with a schedule. She went back inside to put on her shoes. She had known it was coming. Not the truck specifically, not the Tuesday morning timing, but the shape of it, the general direction. She had felt it gathering in the weeks since the funeral, the way weather gathers, that particular pressure in the air before something breaks. Owen had died on a Thursday in March. Not slowly, not with warning. He had been fine, at breakfast, or what passed for fine, which she would understand later meant something different than she had thought. He had poured his coffee and stood at the kitchen counter, the way he always stood there, not doing anything in particular, just being in the same room while she made toast, and she had thought nothing of it, because that was just Owen. He stood at the kitchen counter while she cooked, or made breakfast, or did anything in the kitchen because he said had liked to be in the same room. 31 years of that. The familiar weight of him on the other side of the kitchen. He was gone by 11. Cardiac arrest, the doctor said. Sudden. The word sudden doing a great deal of work in the sentence. What the doctor did not say, what Helen would not find out until later, was that Owen had known for 8 months that his heart was not reliable. That he had gone to a cardiologist the previous July and been told the right ventricle was showing signs of something worth watching. That he had gone back in September and been told it was worth more than watching. That he had left both appointments and driven home, and stood at the kitchen counter and not said a single word about either visit. She would understand this eventually. She would understand that it explained certain things. The Saturday afternoons he called errands. The particular quality of his attention in the months before March. The way he looked at her sometimes across a room as if he was memorizing something. The locked drawer in his study. The address on the red ribbon. The calls he made, and the preparations he set in motion, and the things he put in place without explaining why. She would understand all of it eventually, but on the Tuesday morning in October, when Constance stood on the front walk checking her watch, Helen understood none of it yet. She understood only this: Owen was gone. The house was apparently not hers, and Constance had brought a truck. Audrey was in the hallway, 27 years old. Still in her pajamas, which was notable because Audrey was usually dressed by 7. She was holding her sketchbook against her chest with both arms, the posture of someone who has picked up the thing most important to protect and is waiting to see what needs to happen next. She was Owen's niece, daughter of Owen's brother Carl, who had died 14 months ago of a heart attack at 58. The parallel was not lost on Helen, and she suspected it was not lost on Audrey either. After Carl's funeral, Audrey had driven 9 hours and said she would stay a few weeks. That was 14 months ago. She had never left, and Helen had never asked her to, because the house had needed the sound of someone in it, and Audrey had needed somewhere to be, and those two needs had fit together without anyone having to say so out loud. How many? Audrey said. 2 men. 1 truck. Helen sat on the bottom stair and started on her shoes. Constance. Just Constance? Boyd hasn't come, he'll wait until I'm already gone. Audrey's jaw tightened. Just slightly, just briefly. Then she got control of it. What do you need me to do? Helen tied the left shoe, then the right. She sat for a moment on the bottom stair and looked at the entryway. The hooks where coats hung. The narrow table she'd found at a sale the year they moved in, and which had been exactly right for the space. The hardwood floor that she and Owen had refinished themselves one summer weekend when they were younger and more optimistic about their own capabilities, and it had taken 3 times as long as expected and turned out better than they deserved. Your studio, Helen said. Pack your paintings first. Everything else can wait, Helen. If we lose the paintings, we lose the work. She stood. Everything else is replaceable. Audrey looked like she had many things she wanted to say, and was choosing carefully to say none of them. Okay, she said. She went upstairs. Helen put on her coat. She went back outside. The thing about Constance Voss was that she was not a bad woman. Helen had spent years arriving at this conclusion, and then doubting it, and then arriving at it again, going back through the catalogue of accumulated small wounds. The holiday table comments delivered in the tone of someone offering helpful observations. The way Constance would ask about Helen's teaching career, as you might ask about a pleasant hobby. The way she touched Owen's arm when they talked, a possessive gesture so habitual it had probably stopped being conscious years ago, as if reminding the room she had known him first. But bad was not the right word. Bad would have been easier to manage. Constance was afraid. She had been afraid since the day Owen brought Helen home. Afraid of losing him to a woman she hadn't chosen or approved. Afraid of becoming secondary in her own son's life. Afraid that this woman with a teacher's salary and no family connections would diminish something Constance had spent a long time building. Helen had understood this for years. Understanding it had not made the wound smaller, but it had made hatred impossible, which was its own kind of complicated. She crossed the front walk and stood near Constance. Not confrontationally, just near. The way you stand near someone when you want them to know you're not going anywhere until the conversation happens. I want to ask you something, Helen said. Constance folded her hands. Of course. Does Roland know you're doing this today? Specifically today. A pause. Small. If you hadn't spent 3 decades watching this particular face, you would have missed it. This is a family decision, Constance said. Not an answer. Helen noticed that. And Boyd, she said. Was this his idea? Boyd has legal expertise that's been helpful in managing. Was this Boyd's idea, Constance? A longer pause. We all agreed. This was the appropriate course, Constance said. Helen nodded slowly. Not because she believed it. Because she was learning something, and you don't interrupt a lesson when it's giving you exactly what you came for. She thought about Roland. 81 years old, quiet in the way of a man who had spent most of his marriage in the background of his own family. She had watched him across dinner tables for 31 years. She had caught his eye sometimes briefly, and seen something there that he had each time chosen not to bring into the room. Some private awareness, some disagreement he had weighed and decided was not worth the cost. She had always wondered what it would take for Roland to decide the cost was worth it. She filed the question away. Give me until noon, she said. The men are already noon. Please. She held Constance's gaze. It's a 31-year house. Give me until noon. Something moved in Constance's expression. Not softness, something older than softness. The recognition that this was whatever she had told herself on the drive over, not entirely clean. Noon, Constance said. She walked back to her car. The next 3 hours had the particular efficiency of something you do when efficiency is the only tool you have left. Helen moved through the house the way she had moved through her classroom at the end of every school year, looking at things once, not letting herself stop too long anywhere, or the stopping would become something she couldn't come back from. The kitchen counter where Owen stood while she cooked. The window seat on the landing where she graded papers while he pretended to read but was actually watching her. The third step from the top of the stairs that creaked and which she had learned to skip over, and which Owen had never once remembered to skip over in 31 years. She packed her clothes, her books, the teaching awards from the hallway wall, 4 of them, 33 years of work stacked into a cardboard box, a shoebox of letters and cards, the accumulated evidence of decades in a classroom, the photograph of her parents taken at a campground in 1971, her mother laughing at something off camera, her father holding a fishing rod with the expression of a man who has finally caught something worth mentioning, and the photograph of Owen, a picnic, 2003. He was squinting into the sun, holding a hot dog with the slightly uncertain expression of a man who had put on too much mustard and was now committed to it. She had taken the picture herself. She remembered doing it. She remembered thinking, I want to keep this. The exact quality of his face in that particular afternoon light. She put it in the box carefully. Face up, she left the furniture, the dishes they had chosen together at a store that had since closed, and which she still sometimes thought about because the woman who worked there had known which plates would actually stack properly. The lighthouse painting that Owen had bought because she had mentioned once in 1994, that she liked lighthouses. She could not take the lighthouse painting. It needed to stay on that wall, even knowing Constance would take it down before the truck reached the end of the street. Some things need to stay where they belong, even when the person who put them there is gone. Audrey made 4 trips to the car without being asked. She wrapped every canvas in old bedsheets and towels. She packed the record player in its original box with newspaper around it and wedged it between 2 solid boxes so it wouldn't shift. She did all of this without commentary and without questions because she understood, the way Audrey generally understood the important things, that this was not a moment for commentary or questions. At 11:50, Helen stood in the empty hallway. The blank wall where the lighthouse painting had been. The marks on the door frame where she and Owen had measured their heights as a joke one New Year's, and she had insisted they do it every year after that, and they had, until they stopped being able to pretend the measurements were changing. She put her hand flat against the wall, felt the plaster, the paint over the plaster. 31 years of mornings. She picked up the last box. She walked out. Constance was on the walk. She had prepared something to say. Helen could see the preparation in her face. Something appropriate about the difficulty of transitions, or the importance of moving forward, or any of the dozen phrases available to people who need to acknowledge a painful situation without actually inhabiting it. Helen spoke first. "You're going to want to look closely at what Boyd has been doing," she said. "Not what he's told you he's doing. What he's actually doing." Constance blinked. I'm not saying it to start a fight." Helen shifted the box to her other arm. "I'm saying it because I've known you for 31 years, and I think somewhere underneath all of this, you already feel that something isn't right, and because you deserve to know the truth about your own family, before it comes at you some other way." She put the box in the car. She got in. She did not look back at the house as she drove away. She did not cry until she turned off the street. She drove with the address on a folded piece of paper on the passenger seat. She had found it 9 days after the funeral. The night had felt more like the bottom of something than a night should feel. She had gone into Owen's study because she couldn't sleep and couldn't be in the bedroom and couldn't watch television and needed to be in a room that still smelled like him. His coffee mug in the dish rack because no one had put it away. His reading glasses on the windowsill folded, waiting. His desk with the particular organized disorder of a man who knew where everything was even if the system was invisible to everyone else. She had sat in his chair. She had just existed there for a while, not thinking exactly, breathing. And then she noticed the bottom left drawer. She had never paid it particular attention before. She pulled on it and found it locked, looked at the lock for a moment, then went to the kitchen junk drawer, the one behind the good drawer, the one that held everything that didn't have somewhere better to go, and in the back, behind expired coupons and a broken watch and batteries she kept meaning to test, she found a small key on a paper clip. She knew it was the right key before she tried it. 31 years. You learn to know certain things before you have to. The drawer opened. Inside, a manila envelope. Her name on the front in Owen's handwriting. That handwriting she knew better than her own. Messier than he meant it to be, he always apologized for it, but she had never once found it hard to read. She opened it. Inside, a folded piece of paper with an address on Caldwell Street, cross streets noted carefully. A name, Estelle Pruitt, a small brass key on a red ribbon, and one line below those things in Owen's hand. You'll know what to do. I trust you. She had sat in his chair, holding the paper for a long time. She thought about the cardiologist appointments she would not learn about until months later. About a man who had received news in July and September that required him to start preparing for a possibility he could not say out loud. Who had stood at the kitchen counter every morning between July and March and looked at her across the kitchen and not said a word about what he knew. She did not know any of that yet, sitting in his chair on the night after his funeral. She only knew that he had left her an address. She put the key in her coat pocket. She would carry it for 9 days before she was ready to use it. Now she turned onto Caldwell Street and drove slowly. The house was not what she had prepared herself for. She had not known what to prepare for. Given the morning. Given everything. Something that confirmed the feeling, maybe. Something that looked as bad as things felt. But the house on Caldwell Street was just a house. Old, built when they still used materials that lasted, which meant it was still standing correctly. Even though the porch steps sagged, and the paint had surrendered at every edge, and 2 of the shutters hung at angles they had clearly been meaning to correct for some years. A garden once. You could see the outline of it under the weeds. Not random weeds, shaped ones. Weeds growing inside a structure that someone had built, and that still held its form underneath everything that had grown over it. Helen parked. She sat for a moment. She looked at the house and thought, Owen, this is what you were doing on Saturdays. A woman came out the front door. 74 or 75. Small and upright, in the manner of someone who had decided early on that good posture was the one thing she was keeping regardless of what else got taken from her. White hair cut short and practical. A cardigan the color of old brick. She came down the porch steps with the deliberate care of someone who knew exactly which board to trust and which to step around. She stopped at the bottom and looked at Helen. Helen looked back. You're Helen, the woman said. Not a question. I am, Helen said. Owen said you'd look like someone who'd just made up her mind about something. Helen felt the specific vertigo of hearing Owen's voice in a stranger's description of her. The accuracy of it. The fact that he had said it to this woman on this street before the need for it had arrived. Owen said that, she said. He said a lot of things. The woman put out her hand, dry, strong. The handshake brief and decided. Estelle Pruitt. Call me Estelle. I have never liked Mrs. Pruitt and I'm too old to start. Helen shook her hand. He called me, Estelle said. Owen. About 3 weeks before he died, she said it plainly. The way you say something true that you know will cause pain but would cause more pain. Said any other way. He said he had a wife who might need somewhere to be. He said it might be soon or it might be further off, but either way he wanted the house ready. Helen looked at the small brass key in her hand. The red ribbon. He oiled the front lock, Estelle said. Last spring. Said he didn't want it to stick. He had oiled it in April. He had been to the cardiologist for the 2nd time in September when the news was worse than July. In the months between those appointments and March, he had done what he had always done. Moved quietly. Made things ready. And said nothing that would cause her to worry before worrying was necessary. Helen stood on the sidewalk in front of a house she had never seen and understood. For the first time, this full shape of what he had been doing. Not hiding things from her. Building things for her. The distinction was important. She would spend months understanding exactly how important. Audrey had pulled up behind her car. She got out and stood on the sidewalk, with her hands in her coat pockets, looking at the house with the expression she used when she was doing the serious work of actually seeing something, rather than just looking at it. Helen tried the key. The lock didn't stick. Inside, old wood and high ceilings and hardwood floors under years of accumulated grime that was, if you thought about it correctly, just potential that hadn't been reached yet. A kitchen with windows on 2 sides that would get good light in the afternoon. A back door that opened onto a small yard with a rusted fence, and an apple tree that had grown considerably larger than anyone had planned for. Helen stood in the empty living room and turned around slowly. Audrey stood in the doorway. It needs a lot of work, Helen said. Yes, Audrey said. The porch steps are a hazard. They are. The bathroom is probably 1970s. Almost certainly 1970s. Helen looked at the afternoon light coming through the front windows. Not the best light of the day yet, but she could see what it would do later. She could see the shape the room was trying to be. He picked well, she said. Something in Audrey's face came loose. The careful control of the morning releasing just slightly. He really did. Estelle appeared in the kitchen doorway with 3 mugs of coffee she had produced without anyone noticing she was making them. Owen mentioned you needed it before 9, she said. Said it was non-negotiable. I don't know how you take it. I made it strong. Helen took a mug. She thought about the coffee she had set down on the kitchen counter that morning at the sight of the truck. Still sitting there, cold now, in a kitchen that was no longer hers. She stood in the middle of an empty room in a house that needed everything and drank the coffee. Strong was exactly right, she thought. All right, she thought, this is where it starts. They moved in over 2 days. Audrey's paintings went up first along the living room wall, bright and layered and entirely hers. Helen put nothing on her own walls for a while. She walked the rooms, measured them against herself, figured out where she wanted her reading chair and put it there. Estelle came by the second morning. She did not knock. She came through the back gate, which Helen would come to understand was simply Estelle's preferred entrance because the back gate was closer to her own back gate, and Estelle had well-developed opinions about efficiency. She brought a hammer, a level, a bag of wood screws, and a thermos of coffee. The hardware store is 2 blocks north, she said, settling onto the kitchen counter, because the chairs had not found their positions yet. Pete Harmon runs it. He has what you'll need for the porch steps and he won't explain things to you that don't need explaining. How do you know I want to fix the porch steps myself? Estelle gave her the look of a woman who has encountered this particular question before and found it mildly tiresome. I know how to fix porch steps, Helen said. I didn't say you didn't. Estelle poured from the thermos. Pete knew Owen. You should introduce yourself. He'll want to know you arrived. Helen paused over a box she was unpacking. How did Pete know Owen? Owen came by when he was setting things up, paid to have the inside cleaned, the locks changed, the water heater checked. Estelle said it simply, just the facts of it. He left a good trail on this block. People will be glad to know the house has someone in it. Helen stood with a kitchen bowl in her hands. She thought about a man who had known since September that his heart was uncertain, who had come to a house on a street his wife had never heard of, paid for the water heater to be checked, oiled the front lock, spoken to the neighbor, spoken to the hardware store owner, left the key on a red ribbon in a locked drawer, who had stood at the kitchen counter every morning between September and March and not said a word. Not because he was keeping secrets from her, because he was keeping something for her. There was a difference. She was just starting to understand it. She put the bowl in the cabinet. She said Owen had a cardiologist. I didn't know that until after. Estelle was quiet for a moment. He mentioned his heart, she said carefully. Not the details, just that there was something to manage. She looked at Helen directly. He said he wasn't worried about himself. He said he was only worried about making sure you had what you needed if things went a certain way. Helen looked at the window over the sink, the October light coming through it, thin and clear and honest. She thought about 31 years of a man at a kitchen counter, standing there because he liked to be in the same room. Not because he needed anything, just because he wanted to be where she was. She thought about July, about September, about all the mornings between September and March, when he had stood there knowing something she didn't know, and looking at her the way she would later remember, the way that had seemed like just Owen being Owen. That attentive quality he had always had. She had not known he was memorizing. All right, she said. Estelle refilled her mug. They didn't say anything else for a while. The house breathed around them, that specific sound of an old building settling into its own weather, and Helen stood in the kitchen of her new house on Caldwell Street and let herself be in it. The porch steps took a Saturday afternoon. Pete Harmon at the hardware store was 63 and wore a canvas work vest and had the economy of motion of someone who had spent 40 years knowing where everything was. He did not explain things that didn't need explaining. He handed Helen the right lumber and the right hardware and said, while writing up the receipt, Owen was particular about materials. Said cheap always cost more in the end. He was usually right about things like that, Helen said. He mentioned someone was coming who would take care of this house. Pete looked up from the receipt. The direct look of someone who wants you to know they mean what they're saying. Said she'd know what she was doing. Helen drove home with the lumber. She and Audrey worked through the afternoon without much talking, which was right. Audrey measured and Helen nailed, and they traded jobs when the work required it, and by 5 o'clock the steps were done. They stood at the bottom and tested them. Solid. Level. Built to hold. Dad would have found something wrong with the spacing, Audrey said. He would have measured it 4 times and found a problem with the 4th measurement, Helen said. Audrey laughed. Short and genuine. The late October light was going orange, and the maples on Caldwell Street were at their best colored, and Helen noticed it the way Owen had always noticed it, which was the way she had learned to notice it from him over 31 years. She thought, I am still doing this. I am still doing the things he taught me to do. That was something. She found the program listing in Estelle's kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks into Caldwell Street. She had come to return a casserole dish, and stayed because Estelle had coffee going, and the kitchen was warm. And Helen had learned quickly that Estelle's kitchen had the quality of a place where things became clearer than they were when you walked in. A pamphlet on the table. Simple. A program name at the top, a list of sessions, a contact number. What's this? Helen said. Estelle glanced at it. The program I have run for about 12 years. For women who've lost their husbands or their homes or both, who are trying to be on their own after decades of not being. She poured. It's not a charity exactly. It's more like people who know things teaching people who need to know them. Plumbing. Contracts. What to say to a contractor. What not to sign for a landlord. Helen picked up the pamphlet. Owen contributed, Estelle said, without preamble. The way she said most things. A meaningful amount every year. For 9 years. Through an account I didn't ask questions about. She sat down. He asked me once what to call it. I said I didn't care as long as it kept coming. He laughed. 9 years. Helen set the pamphlet down. He built the raised beds in your garden, she said. You told me. About 8 years ago. 9. He was doing both. Probably more than both, Estelle said. He wasn't a man who did one thing when he could do several. Helen sat with that. She thought about July, the first cardiologist appointment, a man who received uncertain news about his heart and began, methodically, doing the things he had probably been meaning to do for a while, and now had clearer reason to do. She thought about the address on the red ribbon. She thought about Pete Harmon and the water heater and the oiled lock. She thought about a man she had known for 31 years who had, it turned out, been doing this the whole time. Not recently. Not only since the diagnosis, the whole time, just quietly. Just because there were people who needed things, and he had the capacity to provide them without making a production of it. How much didn't I know about him? She said. Not a complaint, not exactly grief. Something between wonder and the specific sadness of arriving late to something that had been there all along. Estelle considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. You knew the important things, she said finally. You knew what he was like when everything went wrong. You knew who he was when nobody was watching. She looked at Helen steadily. The things you didn't know weren't hidden from you. They were just his. Some people keep things that way. Not secrets. Just theirs. Helen thought about 31 years of a man at a kitchen counter. She thought, that is also just Owen. That is exactly just Owen. Boyd called on a Wednesday evening, 5 weeks into Caldwell Street. She saw his name and stood in the kitchen and decided to answer. Helen, the warmth of someone who needs something. Not genuine warmth, the functional approximation of it. I've been hoping we could talk. All right, she said. There are some administrative things related to the estate. Standard matters. I'd like to have my lawyer reach out to yours to arrange. I have a lawyer, she said. She did not yet have a lawyer. She had a voicemail from a man named Philip Crane that she had not yet returned, but the distinction felt unimportant in the moment. A brief pause. She heard him recalibrate. Good, he said. That's smart. I just want to make sure everything is handled correctly. For everyone. Including you. Including you. The warmth slightly overdone now. Like someone who has realized they need to turn it up, and turned it up too far. I'm sure you do, she said. Helen, I know this transition has been painful. Nobody wanted it to go this way. The house situation. Somebody organized the truck, Boyd. Silence. We all just want what's best, he said. Lower now. The warmth dropping into something closer to his actual register. For the family. She thought about Constance on the walk, checking her watch. She thought about the pause when she had asked if this was Boyd's idea. She thought about Roland, whom she had not heard from once since the funeral. Have your lawyer call mine, she said. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the number Philip Crane had left in her voicemail 4 times. His office was downtown. Smaller than she expected. Books, files, the organized accumulation of a man who managed other people's complicated situations, and had spent years learning where everything was. He had the face of someone who had been through things and come out honest. Not remarkable. Not particularly warm in the performed way. Just direct. The face of a man who had decided at some point that the truth, said plainly, was kinder than the truth softened until it became something else. He stood when she came in, shook her hand, offered coffee. She declined. I appreciate you coming in, he said. I know it took some time. I needed some time, of course. He opened the folder. I represented Owen for 12 years. He didn't come to me for the usual things. He came with a plan and wanted someone to make sure it was legally sound. He was, Crane paused, choosing the word, specific. About almost everything, that sounds right. He spoke about you throughout our work together. Not sentimentally, practically. He would say, Helen needs this part to hold. Helen would want this structured this way. He thought about you when he made decisions. A pause. It was evident in everything he asked me to build. Helen put her hands in her lap and held them still. Tell me what Boyd is trying to do, she said. Not in legal language. Just what he's doing. Crane looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. The house was legitimately part of the Voss family trust, he said. That part is real. Owen didn't own it jointly with you. Boyd isn't inventing that particular fact. He set his hands on the folder. But there are other assets. Owen registered a patent 14 years ago. A thermal engineering process. He licensed it to 2 manufacturers and received royalty payments through the years. He put those payments into a separate account, not attached to the Voss family money, not joint with you, not reachable by Boyd through any normal mechanism. Helen was very still. How much, she said. $2.4 million, approximately. He said it carefully, giving it the space to land. He structured it as a trust. A separate trust in his name, with the trusteeship transferring to you upon his death. $2.4 million. Helen looked at the filing cabinet to the left of his desk. There was a coffee stain on the corner of it, old and faded. She noticed it the way you notice small irrelevant things when something large is happening, and your mind needs somewhere unimportant to go for a moment. The patent, she said. He mentioned it once, years ago. I thought it hadn't come to anything. He never corrected that impression. Crane was careful here, not unkind. I asked him why once, he said. A pause. He said, the day she finds out about this is a day she's already needed it. He didn't want you to know before you needed it, because knowing it changes things before the changing is necessary. Helen closed her eyes, for a moment. That was so entirely Owen that she could hear him saying it. That specific wave of thinking 3 steps ahead and then stepping back so the person he loved wouldn't feel managed. The lock oiled in April so it wouldn't stick. The address left where she would find it, but only when she was ready to need it. A man who prepared things and then got out of the way and trusted. He knew his heart was uncertain, she said. Yes. Crane looked at her steadily. He came to me in August after his second cardiology appointment. He said he wasn't expecting the worst, but he was done leaving things unfinished. A pause. He spent the next 7 months making sure nothing was unfinished. Helen sat with that. 7 months. October, November, December, January, February, March. 7 months of standing at the kitchen counter, of looking at her across rooms, of saying errand when he meant something else entirely. Not lying. Preparing. Boyd knows about the patent, she said. Yes. Crane's voice shifted slightly, the directness taking on a different quality. That's the other part. Boyd has known for approximately 2 years. He found it in Owen's papers during a routine family accounting. He told no one. Not Constance. Not Roland. Helen looked at Crane. He waited, she said. He waited. He has significant debt commercial ventures that haven't returned what he projected. Loans coming due in April of next year. He looked at Owen's trust and saw a solution. The plan, Crane explained, was not complicated. Evict Helen while she was still in the disorientation of fresh grief. Present her with estate paperwork framed as routine. Buried inside that paperwork, a clause that would transfer the trusteeship of Owen's fund to a Voss family holding specifically Boyd if Helen failed to exercise trustee rights within a set window. If she signed without reading. If she was tired enough. Alone enough. If she had already packed 31 years into the back of a car and driven away from everything she knew and had nothing left to stand on. He would have had it. He had been very close. Does Constance know? Helen asked. I don't believe so. Crane chose his words carefully. I think Boyd told her the house needed to revert to the trust for legal reasons, which is technically accurate, and she accepted that without asking what came next. Helen thought about the pause on the front walk. This is a family decision that was not an answer. The particular quality of Constance's discomfort that morning, which Helen had read as the discomfort of doing something you believed was right but found hard, which had been, she understood now, something different. The discomfort of a woman who had not asked the questions she should have asked, and somewhere underneath the certainty she was performing, already knew it. She didn't want to ask, Helen said. Sometimes, Crane said, people know the shape of something without wanting to look directly at the details. Helen nodded. She stood up. She took the folder he had already prepared for her, copies of everything, organized in the way of a man who anticipated that she would want to go through it herself. Don't sign anything Boyd's lawyers send you, Crane said. Don't let him know you've been here. I wasn't planning to. She picked up her bag. She stood in the doorway of his small office. He came to this because he thought I had nothing. He thought when you take away a woman's house, you've taken away her ability to fight back. Crane looked at her. Owen thought about that, he said. That's why he built what he built the way he built it. Helen stood in the doorway of Philip Crane's office on a gray October street and understood, fully and finally, the complete shape of what Owen Garrett had spent 7 months putting in place. Not money, not property, a way through. Clear and quiet and already in place, already waiting. She walked out into the afternoon. The maples on the street were the best color they would be all year. She noticed it. She would keep noticing things like this. That was one of the things Owen had left her that wasn't in any document, the habit of looking at the right things. She walked to her car. She sat for a moment before she started it. She thought, the lock didn't stick. She thought you oiled it in April. She thought I found the key. She drove home to Caldwell Street. She set the folder on the kitchen table. She sat down in the chair she had positioned near the window because the afternoon light came through it best. She opened the folder. She began to read. She read until the light was gone, and Audrey came downstairs and turned on the lamp without asking and said, without looking at the folder, that there was soup on the stove whenever Helen was ready. Helen read a little longer. Then she put the folder down. She went to the kitchen. She sat across from Audrey and they ate soup in the warm kitchen of their house on Caldwell Street and did not talk about the folder or Boyd or Crane or any of it. They talked about the garden, about what was under the weeds, about what it might look like if someone got down in there and found out what was still alive. November arrived without asking permission. Not the gradual kind. The other kind. The kind that shows up overnight and expects you to have already adjusted. Helen woke on the 1st to find frost on the inside of the bathroom window and understood 2 things immediately. The wall insulation was inadequate, and she needed to deal with it before January made the point more forcefully. She wrote it on the list. The list lived on a yellow legal pad on the kitchen counter. It had started as 3 items the first week: porch steps, kitchen faucet, bathroom caulking. But lists grow once you give them permission. And by the 2nd week of October it had expanded into subcategories. and by November it had 3 pages and a system. She did not find this discouraging. She found it clarifying. There is a particular kind of person who, when handed a problem, does not sit with it. She walks around it, measures it, takes it apart to find what it's made of. Helen had been that kind of person for 61 years, and grief had not changed her. It had slowed her down the way a fever slows you, but the essential thing underneath was still there. She was, at her core, a person who made lists and then worked through them. Audrey said on a Wednesday morning that the back bedroom window let cold air in along the bottom sill. Added, the kitchen pipes made a sound at 2 in the morning like someone tapping a wall. Added, something moved in the attic. Helen went up with a flashlight, found a gap in the eave, identified the likely tenant, and wrote, attic gap before squirrels get comfortable. Audrey watched all of this with an expression caught between reassured and slightly unnerved. You're very calm, Audrey said. I'm not calm. Helen wrote the last item. I'm busy. There's a difference. Audrey considered this for a moment. Okay, she said. What can I do? That was the thing about Audrey. She didn't ask the way people ask when they want you to give them something small so they can feel helpful. She asked with the expectation of a real answer. She would go up to the attic if that was what was needed. She would read the directions on a bag of insulation and make it work. She was, at her core, exactly the same kind of woman as Helen, which was probably why they had never once gotten on each other's nerves. Not in 14 months of living in the same house. Not now, in a smaller house with more things needing fixing and less room for retreating from each other. The window in your room, Helen said. Take the gray caulk tube and the gun from the workbench. Do the interior sill first. I've never used a caulk gun. It's not complicated. You'll work it out. And if I do it wrong, then I'll show you how to peel it off and do it again. Helen looked up. That's how you learn most things. Audrey went to get the caulk gun. From the back bedroom came one short, quiet word that Helen pretended not to hear. She smiled. Pete Harmon's hardware store was 2 blocks north, and Helen was becoming a regular. Pete was 63 and wore the same canvas vest every time she came in. He had the unhurried competence of a man who had spent 40 years knowing where everything was and what it was for. He didn't waste words. He also didn't talk to Helen the way some men talk to women in hardware stores, which was the way you talk to someone who had probably wandered into the wrong aisle. He talked to her like she knew what she needed. Because she did. Expanding foam or bat, he said, when she described the attic situation. Bat for the floor coverage, foam for the gap at the eave. Right call. He pulled both from the shelf without looking. Owen used to do it the same way on his mother's old place. Said foam for entry points, bat for the rest. Said it was the only combination that actually held heat. Helen paused at the counter. You knew Owen well? Well enough. Pete set the items down. He came in 5-6 times the year before he passed. Particular about materials. Wouldn't buy cheap because he said it always cost more eventually. He looked at her directly, the way someone looks when they want to make sure you receive what they're saying. He mentioned someone was coming who would take care of this house. Said she'd know what she was doing. He said she. Helen paid for the foam and the bat and the extra screws she'd need. She drove home through the November streets and thought about a man who had talked to hardware store owners about her before she'd ever set foot on this block, before she'd known the block existed, before she'd known there was anything to need. She thought, Owen Garrett, we are going to have a very long conversation someday. She was not entirely sure if that was grief or faith. Probably it was both. Faye Holbrook called on a Friday. Helen and Faye had taught at the same school for 19 years. English and history, neighboring classrooms, shared prep periods, and the friendship that forms between people who spend a lot of time in close proximity to controlled chaos and need someone across the hallway to exchange a look with. The look that means, can you believe this? While simultaneously meaning, yes, I completely can. Faye was 58. She had the energy of someone younger and the vocabulary of someone who had spent decades around teenagers and retained all of it. I heard, she said when Helen picked up. About the house, about Boyd. Word travels. Helen, it has been traveling since October. Why didn't you call me? I needed to settle first. A pause. You needed to settle. You were evicted from your home 11 days after your husband died and you needed to settle. Yes, I would have come. I know. I would have brought people. That's exactly why I waited. Helen sat in her chair by the window. The maple out front had dropped most of its leaves. She'd been watching it happen incrementally, one windy day at a time. I wasn't ready for people. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I had witnesses. Silence on the other end. Then, that is the most you thing you have ever said. I know. Are you all right? Helen thought about how to answer that honestly and not cause Faye to drive over tonight when Faye had school in the morning. I'm working on it, she said. Can I come Saturday? Yes. The steps are finished. There's somewhere to sit. I'm bringing food. You don't need to. Helen. Fine. What does Audrey eat? Helen told her. They sorted out the details. Faye said something about a pasta. Helen said that was fine. Faye said fine wasn't enthusiasm. And Helen said she was working on enthusiasm too. And Faye laughed. The real kind. The across the hallway kind that Helen had been hearing for 19 years. She hung up. The house was quiet in the way it was quiet after a good thing happened. Not empty quiet. The other kind. Faye arrived Saturday with 2 other women. Helen opened the door and found 3 people on the new porch steps. Faye holding a casserole dish. Beside her, a woman named Dottie Marsh, who had substitute taught at the high school 4 years ago, and who wore a bright yellow cardigan and had opinions about everything, consistently accurate. And beside Dottie, a neighbor from Faye's street named Gloria Hendricks, who was 70 and had once, Faye had told Helen years ago, rebuilt her own kitchen cabinets after her husband decided the job was too complicated. Had done it herself. Turned out the husband had been the one making it complicated. I thought you were coming alone, Helen said. I never said that, Faye said and walked in. Audrey appeared at the top of the stairs, looked at the 3 women filling the entryway, looked at Helen, looked back at the women. I'll make coffee, Audrey said and disappeared. The right instinct. The only instinct. The 5 of them filled the afternoon in different configurations. Faye and Helen at the kitchen table. Dottie and Audrey in the living room, Dottie examining each of Audrey's paintings with the focused attention of someone who took art seriously and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Gloria walking slowly through the rooms because she said she liked to know the shape of a space before she settled into it, partway through the afternoon, while Dottie was explaining to Audrey exactly what she thought was happening in the large blue canvas by the window, which was apparently more structurally interesting than it looked. Faye leaned across with the kitchen table and said, simply, tell me about Boyd. Helen told her. Not all of it. The shape, the eviction, the estate paperwork, the sense that there was a plan she hadn't been shown running underneath the plan she had been shown. Faye listened without interrupting. She could do this when something required it. It was not her natural state, but she understood when the listening was more important than the response. He's always been like this, Faye said when Helen finished. Boyd. I had his son for 2 years, the apple. She shook her head slowly. What are you going to do? I know what he's trying to get, Helen said. So I know what to protect. Faye wrapped both hands around her mug. You need people around you. I have people. You have Audrey. Audrey is excellent, but you need a wider circle. People who knew you and Owen, who can say, without hesitation and without being bought, what kind of woman you are. Helen hadn't framed it that way, but now that Faye had, she saw it. 33 years in a classroom. Students who were now in their 40s and 50s and who still sent cards at Christmas. Colleagues who had watched her teach and trusted her judgment. Parents who had sat across the desk from her and left with more than they'd come in with. A principal who'd hired her in 1989 and 2 more after him. A school board member who'd quoted her in his retirement speech. She had, without intending to, spent 3 decades building a record of who she was. Boyd was counting on her being isolated and disoriented and unknown, on a street where nobody had seen her before. He had not accounted for Faye Holbrook. He had not accounted for 19 years of classrooms and the network they built. All right, Helen said. Faye nodded once. The way you nod when business is actually concluded. Now, she said, tell me what you're doing with the garden, because I saw the beds out back and I have opinions. Boyd's letter arrived through his lawyers on a Monday. 3 pages. Dense language designed to be heavy. Helen read it twice, stripped it down to what it actually said, and found this. As executor of the Voss estate, Boyd was requesting an accounting of all personal property removed from the home, and offering a release of further claims in exchange for a settlement. The number was $12,000. Helen read it once more, set it down. She thought about Crane's folder, the patent, the royalties. $2.4 million that Boyd knew existed and was hoping she did not. $12,000. She put the letter in the folder she'd labeled Boyd's nonsense on the tab, in plain handwriting, without irony, because naming a thing accurately kept it the right size. Audrey came in and saw Helen's face. "Boyd," she said. "Boyd." Helen set the folder back on the counter. "He's feeling the clock." "What clock?" "The one that runs out when I don't sign anything." She poured more coffee. "When someone needs you to move quickly, it means the advantage is yours if you wait. Boyd needs my signature before I understand what I actually have." She picked up the mug, which I already know so. Audrey sat down slowly across from her, turned her own mug in her hands. Then, "Helen?" "Yes. Owen left more than the house on Caldwell, didn't he?" Helen looked at her. She hadn't told Audrey yet. She'd been holding it. Not as a secret. Nothing about this felt like something to hide. More like something she was still fitting into her understanding of her own life. Some things need to be carried a while before you can set them down in front of someone else. "More than we need," she said. "Less than would change who we are." Audrey was quiet for a moment. "That's a very Owen answer," she said. "I know." Helen looked at the window. The maple, almost bare now. Just the structure of it. The lines, "He taught me." She called Crane that afternoon. He told her not to acknowledge the letter, not even to confirm receipt. He said Boyd was working against a deadline, and the letter was a test to see if Helen knew enough to refuse. He said there were other things he'd been looking at. He asked if she could come in Thursday. She said yes. She went back to the legal pad. Attic gap done. Kevin had come for 2 hours, sealed it, put wire mesh over it, gone again. He'd said to tell Estelle hello and mentioned she had fed him a real lunch. Every time he'd worked on her block for 10 years, said it was non-negotiable. Kitchen faucet done. Loose fitting in the wall. 15 minutes. Bathroom window sill done. Audrey had done it herself, peeled it off twice and done it again, and the final result was actually better than Helen would have managed. Porch steps done. Solid, holding. She added new items. Then she went to the back garden and stood in the cold for a while. The raised beds. Owen's afternoon 9 years ago. A truck of soil and a whole Saturday, and Estelle feeding him lunch and not asking for explanations. She was going to have to do something about this garden. Not now. Not in November. But she was going to have to. She could see what it had been. She could see underneath the weeds and the neglect what it still wanted to be. Crane's office. Thursday, the chair with the worn right armrest. She had been in this chair 4 times now. It had the quality of a place where true things got said. She had come to trust it for that. "Boyd is moving faster," Crane said. "The letter. That's not the only thing." He opened the folder. The new one. Thicker than the last. "He's made inquiries with the county about the Caldwell property, trying to establish whether Owen's payment of property taxes creates a claim against the estate. Does it? No. Owen paid taxes through an LLC that's part of the trust that now belongs to you. Boyd's inquiry will go nowhere." Crane set the folder down. "But he's trying every door. He'll keep trying until he finds one that isn't secured, or until he realizes they all are. That's what we're building toward." He looked at her. "There's something else. I've been doing a fuller audit of the trust, every disbursement going back to the beginning. At your authorization." She had given that authorization at their last meeting. "Just in case." "What did you find?" she said. Crane was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that comes before something that rearranges the room. "Boyd has significant debt," he said. "Not unusual for someone in commercial real estate. But the timeline is specific. He's been financially overextended for about 3 years. The loans he took are coming due in tranches. The next major payment falls in April of next year." Helen absorbed this. "He needed access to the trust before April," she said. "He needed your signature before April. Whether through the settlement release or through some other document he could get in front of you, while you were disoriented. Crane looked at her evenly. The eviction was timed. The month after the funeral, when you were most likely to be overwhelmed. When Constance could be told it was the legally appropriate course without having to explain the real purpose behind it. Constance. Helen thought about what she'd said on the walk that last morning. You're going to want to take a closer look at what Boyd's been doing. The thing she hadn't been able to leave unsaid. She thought about Constance's face, a woman who suspects something and has decided deliberately not to look directly at it. Does Constance know the full picture? Helen asked. I don't believe so. I think Boyd gave her the true legal facts about the house, which were enough to justify the action without telling her what he planned to do next. A pause. Constance trusted him because he's her son, and because he gave her enough of the truth to feel like she understood the situation. Helen thought about that. 31 years of watching Constance Voss manage every room she entered. A woman who controlled information the way other people controlled territory. And her own son had given her just enough of the truth to keep her compliant. She felt something. Not quite sympathy. Adjacent to it. She filed it. What do we do next? She said. Crane pulled out a blank page. We make everything airtight, he said. And then we wait for Boyd to try a door that isn't. The waiting was active. People misunderstood this about waiting. They thought it was passive, that it meant sitting still. But Helen had spent 33 years teaching students who misunderstood it, and she knew better. Waiting was the most disciplined thing you could do. You waited for the student to find the answer themselves, because handing it to them built nothing. You waited for the room to go uncomfortable enough that someone finally said the real thing. You waited for the person performing certainty to run out of performance. Boyd was running. She waited. She finished the bathroom, not a renovation. An intervention. New grout. A shower head that actually pointed correctly. A coat of paint on the walls in the color Audrey described as blue that isn't sure yet if it wants to be blue, which turned out to be exactly right. She fixed the kitchen pipe. The tapping at 2 in the morning. Loose fitting in the wall behind the baseboard. 15 minutes. Done. She started planning the garden. Not planting yet. Just planning. The way you plan a classroom before the first day of school, before students arrive, before anything is actually in place. You need to know the room before you can teach in it. She walked the perimeter of the beds with a notepad, noted the light, noted the drainage, noted what the soil wanted. She called Estelle from the garden one afternoon. What was in these beds originally? She asked. East bed had coneflowers and black-eyed Susans along the border. Baptisia in the corner, that big woody one. Vegetable section against the fence was tomatoes and beans and always too much zucchini. Estelle paused. Owen kept planting zucchini because I asked him to stop, and I think that was his version of a joke. Helen stood in the November garden and laughed. Not a big laugh, just real. I'll plant the zucchini, she said. You absolutely should not, Estelle said. Nobody needs that much zucchini. Helen wrote it on the list. She stayed in the garden until the cold made it unreasonable. She looked at the beds and saw, under the November gray, the shape of what spring could be. Boyd came to Caldwell Street on a Tuesday afternoon. No call, no warning. Just his car at the curb and himself on the porch, with the expression of a man who has decided that casualness is his best remaining strategy. She saw him from the window. Boyd Voss at 56 looked like a man who had made comfortable assumptions for a long time, and was only now beginning to feel them compound. Not physically diminished. Still the expensive coat, the full hair, the posture of someone who expected to fill a room. But something in the set of his jaw was tighter than she remembered. She went to the door. Boyd, she said. Helen. The warmth. The particular approximated warmth. I was nearby. Wanted to check in. Nobody was nearby on Caldwell Street on a Tuesday afternoon by accident. Come in, she said. She brought him to the kitchen. Offered coffee. Made it strong without asking how he took it. Set it on the table. He sat down. He looked around the room with the eyes of someone running calculations they don't want you to see. You've done a lot with the place, he said. It needed doing. Owen always said you had a good eye for spaces. He wrapped his hands around the mug. He said Helen can look at a room and see what it needs to be. Owen had said that. Owen said things about her to his family all the time. Small things. The way you mentioned someone who is always somewhere in your thoughts. And now Boyd was using it as a lever, searching for the lock it fit. She sat down across from him. Let him talk. I'm trying to resolve things cleanly, he said. For everyone. So you've said. The offer in the letter. I've seen the offer. He leaned forward slightly. Helen, I know this has been hard. None of this was what anyone wanted. But there are financial realities to estates. The longer these things drag, the harder they are on everyone. Especially my mother. There it was. His mother. This is taking a toll on her, he said. She needs closure. Helen looked at him. She thought about Crane's folder. The loans. April. The particular meaning of the word closure in the mouth of someone who needed her to stop asking questions. I'll take that under consideration, she said. The offer window isn't indefinite, Boyd. She said it the way she had said the names of students who were about to make a mistake they wouldn't be able to walk back. Quiet. Clear. I haven't signed anything. I'm not going to sign anything through your lawyers without my own counsel present and reviewing it thoroughly. She picked up her coffee. That's not an obstruction. That's how things work. His jaw moved. The warmth dropped several degrees and then climbed back, slightly less convincing than before. Of course, he said. Of course. I just hoped we could handle this as family. As family. Helen thought about the truck at 7 in the morning. 2 men she didn't know. Constance on the front walk with her arms folded. We will handle it correctly, she said, which is what Owen would have wanted. Boyd set down his mug. He stood. The offer has a window, he said. Everything has a window, Helen said. The question is whose. He left. She stood in the kitchen after she heard his car pull away and let the silence settle back in. Then she called Crane. He came to the house, she said. When? 20 minutes ago. A short silence on Crane's end. He's getting nervous. He's getting nervous and he's trying not to show it, which means he's also getting less careful. Don't give him anything to work with. Don't confirm or deny what you know. I didn't. A pause. Are you all right? Helen looked at the mug Boyd had left on her table. Yes, she said. And she was. That was the thing. She was. She had been afraid in October. That first week when everything was still falling and she hadn't found the floor yet. But she had found it. She had listed and worked and planned and waited, and the ground under her was solid now. Boyd Voss with his expensive coat and his diminishing warmth was just another item. She would get to him. Crane called on a Thursday. Different tone than usual. The tone of someone who has been looking at documents for several days and found something that changes the shape of what they've been looking at. There's something you need to hear, he said. Tell me. I've completed the full audit of the trust. Every allocation going back to the beginning. He paused. Owen made regular disbursements to a third-party arts foundation. Small amounts, annual. The foundation offers grants to working artists independent. No gallery affiliation required. Anonymous donor. Helen set down the dish she was holding. Set it carefully on the counter. Stood still. Audrey applied to that foundation 4 years ago, Crane said. She received a grant. She received it again the year after, and the year after that. Helen's hand was flat on the counter. He was funding Audrey's grants, she said. Through the foundation, yes. The grants would have come to her with no donor attribution. She would have had no way to know the source. Helen stood in her kitchen on Caldwell Street in November and looked at the wall across from her. 4 years ago, Audrey had been 23. Just at the hinge point where artists either get enough of a handhold to believe in themselves or they fall away from the work entirely. She'd called Owen when the first grant came through. Helen remembered it. Audrey downstairs on the phone laughing, saying, I can't believe it. I actually got it. I'm actually doing this. Owen had said, That's great, Aud. You deserve it. He had known. He had already known because he had made it happen. And he had sat on the other end of the phone and let her believe she'd gotten it on her own, because that was the only version of it that would actually give her what she needed. Not the money. The belief. The proof that the work was good enough on its own. That the world, or at least some corner of it, could see what she was doing and say, yes, this, more of this. If she'd known it was Owen, she would always have wondered. If she got it because of the work or because of the family. He had taken that question away before she could ask it. Helen closed her eyes. She thought about a man who drove a truck of soil to Estelle's yard on a Saturday without calling ahead, who oiled a lock in spring so it wouldn't stick later, who told a hardware store owner that someone was coming who would know what she was doing, who sat on the phone with his 23-year-old niece and said you deserve it, and did not say one more word than that. She had thought she knew the full shape of how Owen Garrett loved. She had not. She had known the surface of it, the weight of it, the way it felt from inside 31 years of marriage. She had known the daily version, the coffee at the right time, the standing at the kitchen counter just to be in the same room, the third step that creaked that he never remembered to step over even after 30 years. She had not known its reach, how far it went, how quietly it went there. She went out the back door, the November garden, cold, clear, the apple tree bare and standing in the yard with the patient dignity of something that knew winter was temporary. She stood there, and she cried. Not the way she'd been crying in October, which was the crying of someone still in freefall. This was different. This was the crying of someone who had found solid ground, and finally from that ground could feel the whole weight of what she was standing without. She cried for Owen. For the Saturday afternoons she hadn't known about. For the patent mentioned once and never again. For the phone call he'd taken in the kitchen when Audrey got the grant and the thing he had not said. For the lock he oiled and the soil he drove over and the address he put in a drawer on a red ribbon for a day he hoped would never come. She cried for all of it. The apple tree stood there while she did. When she was done, she pressed the back of her hand against her face. Breathed, she went inside. Audrey was in the kitchen. She took one look at Helen and started to say something. Helen said it first. I know something about your grant. The foundation grant 4 years ago. Audrey went still. Helen told her, plain and direct. No softening the edges. Owen, the fund, the annual disbursements to the foundation. The anonymous donor who had made sure her work got seen before she was sure enough in herself to make it visible. Audrey sat down slowly at the table. She didn't say anything for a long time. The record player wasn't on upstairs. The house was very quiet. Outside the kitchen window the maple was nearly bare and the light was the thin silver light of late November. He said you deserve it, Audrey said finally. That's what he said when I called him. I told him I got it and he said, that's great, Aud. You deserve it. She looked at her hands on the table, and he already knew. He already knew. He let me think, he let me have it as mine. Because it was yours, Helen said. Your work got you the grant. He made sure your work got in front of people who could see it. That's not the same thing as giving you something. That's removing an obstacle. Audrey was quiet again. He was something, she said. Very quietly. Yes, Helen said. He was. They sat in the kitchen in the November light, not talking. There wasn't much to say. Some things you have to sit with until they find their proper size, until you can hold them without them holding you. What do we do with it? Audrey said eventually. With the fund. All of it. Helen looked at the window, the bare maple, the structure of it. We do what he set it up for, she said. We take care of people who need taking care of, without making them feel the weight of needing it. She looked back at Audrey. The way he taught us. Audrey nodded slowly. Then and Boyd. Boyd, Helen said, is running out of time. And he doesn't know yet that I know exactly how much. She picked up her mug. Which means he's going to do something bigger than a letter or a house call. What does ready look like? Helen thought about 33 years in a classroom. About knowing which student was about to say the thing that would shift everything. About knowing the room well enough to wait for exactly the right moment. Ready, she said. Looks like knowing more than he thinks we know. And being very quiet about it. She got the legal pad. She wrote at the top of a clean page, Boyd, what he has. What he wants. What he doesn't know we know. She wrote for a long time. Outside the November dark came early and settled over Caldwell Street. And the house held them in the way a house holds people when it has decided they belong in it. Warm. Solid. Going nowhere. December in Ohio doesn't ask. It just arrives. One morning the cold is a different weight than the day before. Not the clean, cutting cold of November that at least has the decency to feel invigorating. Something heavier. The kind that settles into window frames and floorboards and the space between things you thought were sealed. Helen woke on the 2nd of December and stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and watched frost lay itself across the garden in the gray early light. She looked at the raised beds, all that structure under the weeds, all that careful work from years ago still intact, still holding its shape, just waiting for someone to clear the surface and see what was underneath. She thought, that's the whole story. Not a complicated story. Just that one. Things that hold even when they don't look like they're holding. Work done quietly that doesn't announce itself. The truth of something, patient underneath everything, piled on top of it. She drank her coffee. She thought about Boyd. She thought about April. She went to get the legal pad. She spent the first week of December reading. Not the Boyd folder specifically. Everything. Every document Crane had sent her. Every trust provision. Every allocation record. Every piece of paper Owen had filed through Crane's office over 12 years of careful, deliberate planning. She read the way she used to read curriculum standards before the school year started. Not looking for what she expected to find. Looking for what she hadn't thought to look for yet. She found 3 things she hadn't fully understood before. First, the trust had a provision she'd glossed over in October. If the trusteeship was challenged through legal action, and the challenge was found to be without merit, the challenging party was liable for legal costs. Owen had put that in specifically. Crane confirmed when she called him that it was not standard language. Owen had asked for it. He had anticipated a challenge. He had made it expensive to attempt one. Second, the LLC through which Owen had paid property taxes on the Caldwell house was structured so that the house itself was not technically part of the trust. It was a separate asset, transferred to Helen outright at the moment of Owen's death. Not to a trust she managed. To her. Directly. Boyd's inquiry to the county about property tax claims had been searching for a connection to the estate that did not exist. He had been looking at the wrong door entirely. Third, Owen had been making small regular contributions to a legal defense fund through Crane's firm, set up quietly, for Helen's use in exactly this situation. It wasn't large. It was exactly large enough. She sat with that last one for a while. She thought about a man who had spent years preparing for a fight he hoped his wife would never have to have, making sure that if she did have to have it, she would not have to have it alone, or underfunded, or uninformed. She thought about how many Saturday afternoons that kind of preparation took. She picked up her phone. She called Crane. The legal defense provision, she said. Yes. He set that up specifically. About 6 years ago, he said. Crane paused. He said he wasn't worried about you. He was worried about what people do when they're worried about money and they think someone is in the way of it. Helen closed her eyes. 6 years ago. 6 years ago she had been teaching 10th grade history and thinking about whether to repaint the spare room and planning a trip with Owen to see the coast before summer got too crowded. And Owen had been, quietly, making sure she'd have legal protection if she ever needed it. All right, she said. Tell me what I need to do to use it, Crane told her. She wrote it on the list. Audrey found her in the garden on a Saturday afternoon, not doing anything in particular, just standing in it. The December garden, stripped back to its bones, the raised beds dormant and brown, the apple tree bare against the gray sky. Audrey came and stood beside her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Pete Harmon's son is coming Tuesday, Helen said. For the attic check. I want to make sure the ceiling held before we get into the hard cold. Okay. And I want to order the soil amendments for the beds before January. Better to have them ready. Okay, another silence. Helen, Audrey said. I know. We should talk about what happens next. With Boyd. With all of it. Helen looked at the Baptisia bed, the one Estelle said had been there 15 years. Coming back every spring, whether anyone tended it or not. We're not doing anything yet, she said. Not until Crane says we're ready. Not until every door is locked and I know exactly where Boyd is going to try next. And if he tries something we haven't prepared for? Helen looked at her. He won't, she said. Because there's nothing left unprepared. She said it without performance. Just the fact of it. Audrey looked at her for a moment. Nodded. They stood in the December garden a little longer. The cold was the kind that you stop noticing once you've decided to stay in it. The apple tree stood at the center of the yard, patient, knowing something about winter that people had to keep relearning. Boyd sent a second letter through his lawyers the second week of December, more aggressive than the first. The settlement offer was withdrawn. In its place, a formal request for mediation regarding the accounting of personal property removed from the Voss family home. Framed as reasonable. Framed as the appropriate next step. Helen read it once. Wrote one word on the top. Crane. She called him. Don't respond, Crane said. Don't acknowledge. This is a pressure tactic. He's hoping you'll either comply to make it stop or respond in a way that gives him information. He's getting less patient. April is getting closer. A pause. Helen, I think we're close to the point where we need to consider what the endgame looks like for you. Not legally. Personally. What do you actually want to happen? Helen sat at her kitchen table. She thought about that. Not what she wanted to avoid. What she actually wanted. She wanted Boyd to have no path forward. Clear and final and documented. She wanted Constance to know the truth, not to punish her, but because Constance deserved to know what had been done in her name. She wanted Roland, quiet Roland, who had stood at the edges of things for 31 years, to finally see clearly what his son had been doing. And she wanted something harder to name. She wanted the truth of what Owen had built to be visible. Not the money, the intention, the particular, specific, quiet way he had loved the people around him and prepared for their futures and asked for nothing in return. She wanted that to be seen. I want it clean, she said. And I want Constance to know before she hears it from a lawyer. Crane was quiet for a moment. That's going to be the hardest part, he said. I know, Helen said. Which is why I'm going to do it myself. She called Constance on a Friday morning. December light. Low and clear. The kind of morning where everything looked more honest than usual. She stood at the kitchen window with her coffee and dialed the number she had called 40 times over 31 years for holiday logistics and hospital updates. And once, memorably, to find out whether Owen had actually been invited to Boyd's firm event or had simply assumed he was. Constance answered on the fourth ring, Helen. Her voice was careful, not cold, not warm. The studied neutral of a woman who had been half expecting this call and had prepared several versions of herself for it, and still wasn't sure which one to use. I'd like to come and see you, Helen said. Just you, not Boyd. Silence. 5 seconds of it. All right, Constance said. No negotiation, no counteroffer. Just all right, which told Helen quite a lot. She drove to the Voss house on a Monday. The circular driveway, the brass knocker, the kind of house that announced its family from the end of the block. Helen had pulled into this driveway more times than she could count. Holidays and birthdays, and the occasional Sunday that Constance organized into something that looked spontaneous and wasn't. She parked. She sat for a moment. She looked at the house and thought about Owen growing up inside it. The boy who became the man who drove soil to a neighbor's garden on Saturdays, who registered patents quietly and put the money somewhere useful and oiled locks just in case. He had come from these walls and still turned out the way he did. She got out of the car. She carried 2 things, Crane's folder, and a small wooden box she'd found in Owen's study the week after the drawer. Plain wood, the kind he used for organizing small tools. Inside, photographs. A few letters. Things he'd been keeping. She hadn't opened everything in it. Some things felt like they belonged somewhere specific, and she'd been waiting until she understood where. She understood now. Constance answered before Helen reached the door. She had been watching from inside, dressed as she always dressed. Carefully, composed. But something was different. She looked like a woman who had not been sleeping entirely well, who had been sitting with something unresolved, and was tired of the weight of not resolving it. Helen, she said. Constance. Helen held up the box. I have some things that belong to you. Constance looked at it, stepped back. Come in, she said. Roland was in the sitting room. Helen was glad. She hadn't been certain he'd be there, and she had not wanted to ask for him specifically, but she was glad. Roland Voss at 81 was a man she had spent 31 years watching from across rooms. Quiet. Following Constance's lead. Never the one who spoke first, but there had been moments. Small ones. Across dinner tables over the years. Moments where she had caught his eye and seen something there that he had chosen. Each time. Not to voice. Some private knowing. Some awareness he kept for himself rather than bring into the room where Constance was managing everything. He stood when Helen came in. "Helen," he said, "I'm glad you're here." Simple. No performance. "You too, Roland," she said. She sat across from them both, set the folder on the table between them, set the wooden box beside it. Constance looked at both of these things with the expression of a woman who has been not thinking about something for long enough that seeing it made real in physical objects is almost a relief. "I'm going to tell you what's been happening," Helen said. "All of it. From the beginning." Constance's hands settled in her lap. Roland leaned slightly forward. Helen told them. She was a teacher. She knew how to take a complex thing and lay it out in the order that let you understand it. She knew how to watch a face while she talked and adjust the pacing, slow down. When something needed time to land, move past the parts as already understood. She started with Owen, the patent, the trust, Philip Crane, the fund Owen had built, what it was for, what its conditions were, why he had structured it the way he had. Constance was very still. Roland made a small sound at the word patent. Recognition. He'd known Owen had filed something once. He hadn't known it had come to anything. Then Helen told them about Boyd. She was precise. She did not editorialize. Facts said plainly were more devastating than emotion. And she had learned this in 33 years of classrooms. The moment you add heat to a true thing, you give people somewhere to focus other than the truth itself. She laid it out. The debt, the timeline, the loans coming due in April. The 2 years Boyd had spent knowing about Owen's trust and saying nothing while he planned how to reach it. The eviction, what it was actually designed to accomplish. When it had been designed to happen and why. She took the power of attorney document from the folder and placed it on the table in front of Constance. Constance recognized it. She had signed it 8 months ago. Boyd had told her it was for tax purposes. Standard estate administration. She had trusted him because he was her son and because he had used enough of the right words. She read it now. The actual scope of it. What it actually authorized. The room was completely quiet. Roland leaned forward to read over Constance's shoulder. He read for a long time. Then he sat back slowly in his chair. "Boyd did this," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Helen said. Roland looked at Constance. Helen watched something move between them. The particular communication of people who have been married long enough that the important things happen below speech. Some acknowledgement, some private reckoning with what they had each seen and chosen not to say. Constance's hands tightened in her lap. She did not look at Helen. She was looking at the document. "Why?" she said quietly. Not asking why Boyd had done it. Asking something harder. Why she hadn't looked more carefully. Why she had signed something her son handed her, without reading it the way she read everything else. She knew the answer. She just needed a moment to hold it. "Why are you telling me this yourself?" Constance said. Her voice was controlled. "Mostly. You had every reason to let the lawyers handle it." "Yes," Helen said. "So why?" Helen had thought about how to answer this honestly. "Because you're Owen's mother," she said. "And because, whatever happened between us, you have the right to know the truth about your own family before it comes at you through paperwork." She paused. "Owen would have done it this way. I learned that from him." Something moved in Constance's face. Not the wall coming down. Something more like a wall shifting. The kind of change you don't see while it happens. You only see it after, when the light comes through differently. She looked at the wooden box. "What's in there?" she said. Helen opened it. "Owen's things," she said. "From his desk. Things he was keeping." She lifted out the first photograph. Owen and Constance. Early 1980s. From the color and the clothes. Owen young. Laughing at something off camera. That laugh she recognized even at this distance, the one that was bigger than he meant it to be, that surprised him. And Constance beside him. Here was the thing about this photograph. Constance was laughing too. Not the managed appropriate smile Helen had spent 31 years across the table from. The real thing. The unguarded, completely present laugh of a woman who was simply and entirely happy in a single moment. Helen had not known Constance Voss could look like that. She set the photograph in front of her. Constance looked at it. Her hand came up and touched the edge of it. Roland looked too. He made a small sound. Recognition and something older than recognition. There were other photographs. Owen and Roland at what appeared to be a fishing trip sometime in the 90s. Owen and Audrey at her first showing, Audrey luminous with the shock of her own achievement. Owen and Helen at a summer gathering, both of them squinting into the sun, clearly mid-sentence about something, connected even in a moment they hadn't known was being photographed. And then at the bottom of the box, an envelope. On the front, in Owen's handwriting, one word: Mom. Constance stared at it. Her name, on an envelope she had never seen. In her son's handwriting that she knew better than her own name. He didn't send it, Helen said quietly. I found it in the box. I don't know exactly when he wrote it. She paused. I didn't read it. It's not mine. Constance reached out. Her hand was not entirely steady. Helen stood. Take whatever time you need, she said. I'll wait in the hall. She went out and closed the door softly behind her. She stood in the hallway of the Voss house. 31 years of this hallway. The family portraits going back 4 generations. The grandfather clock that had always run 4 minutes fast, and which no one had ever corrected because at some point it had simply become the Voss family's relationship with time. She looked at a portrait of Owen at approximately 12 years old. That serious face, the particular look of concentration he made when he was paying attention to something. The face that would become the face she had known for 31 years, and would know for whatever years she had left. She would have recognized him anywhere, even at 12. Even in a photograph in a house that had never entirely felt like somewhere she was welcome. She pressed her lips together. From behind the door came Constance's voice, low and unsteady. Not the words, just the sound of a woman reading something she should have been told a long time ago. The door opened. Constance stood in the doorway. Her composure was reconstructed, carefully, but things were visible at the edges of it that had not been visible before. The evidence of grief finally finding its shape. Not Owen's death, she had grieved that. Something older and closer. Something about years and what they had contained. Come back in, she said. Roland was standing. He had the look of a man who has made a decision he is not going to revisit. What does Boyd owe, he said. The loans. The amounts and to whom? Helen blinked. Philip Crane has the specifics, she said. I can have him send the documentation. Do that. Roland's voice had a quality she had not heard in 31 years of knowing him. Not loud. Not aggressive. Simply final. The voice of a man who had been quiet for a very long time and was done being quiet. Boyd and I will have a separate conversation. That is between this family and has nothing to do with you or the legal situation. He said it with the specificity of a man who was already sorting what was his to handle from what was not. Roland, Constance said. He looked at her. Something passed between them. She nodded once. Helen looked at Constance. Constance was holding Owen's letter in her lap. She looked up. He wrote, she said. Her voice was slower than usual, carrying something. He said I was always afraid of losing him, that I showed it by trying to control what was around him, instead of just being with him. A pause. He said I controlled things instead of people, as if there was a difference. Helen was quiet. He said you were the reason he knew himself. Constance held the letter carefully, as if it might be the last thing she touched that Owen had touched. He said, living with you was how he learned who he actually was. She set it in her lap. I don't know how to give someone that. I don't think I ever gave anyone that. The room was still. He loved you, Helen said. Without qualification. Whatever else, he was better than I deserved. He was better than most people deserve, Helen said. That was just Owen. It wasn't a judgment. It was just who he was. Something moved across Constance's face. Not quite a smile. A door, opening by a fraction. I want to ask you something, Constance said, and I would like an honest answer. All right. The fund, the house on Caldwell. Everything he left you. She looked at Helen directly. What are you going to do with it? Helen thought about Estelle's program. The women who needed to know how to turn off the water main, and what to do when the furnace died, and how to read a contract without being taken advantage of. The 23-year-old Audrey on the phone, laughing. I actually got it. I'm actually doing this. Owen in a truck full of soil on a Saturday he called errands. The same thing he was doing, she said, quietly, where it matters. Constance looked at her for a long time. I signed Boyd's document, she said. I signed it because he's my son, and I trusted him, and I didn't read it carefully because he told me it was routine. A pause. That is not an excuse, that is just what happened. I know. I'll revoke it today. I'll call my attorney before you're out of the driveway. She straightened slightly, the posture of a woman reclaiming something she'd let slip. Roland will address Boyd directly, and I owe you an apology. Helen waited. The morning with the truck, Constance said. I knew it was wrong. I knew it while I was standing there. I told myself it was the legally correct course of action and the practically necessary one, and I used those words to avoid examining what I was actually doing. She looked at Helen steadily. I was a coward that morning. I am not usually a coward. Helen looked at her. This woman she had spent 31 years trying to understand. You're not a coward, she said. You were protecting something you were afraid to lose. You went about it the wrong way, and you let Boyd tell you the story he needed you to believe. But I've known you for 31 years and coward has never been the right word. Constance's lips pressed together. I still owe you the apology. Yes, Helen said. You do. A beat. I'm sorry, Constance said. For the morning with the truck. For 31 years of making you feel like a guest in a family you had earned the right to belong to. The room held that for a moment. Helen nodded. Not forgiveness in the complete sense. Not the kind that erased things. The kind that acknowledged them and then chose to put them down. Thank you, she said. And she meant it. She called Crane from the car before she turned the engine on. Constance is revoking the power of attorney today, she said. Roland is handling Boyd directly. A silence on Crane's end. Today, he said. Before I left the driveway. Helen. Another pause, that's everything. Boyd has no mechanism without Constance's authority. No access to the trust. No legal standing on any of the property claims. No path to the settlement structure he built. She heard him turning pages. It's done. Helen sat in the driveway of the Voss house. She looked at the bare winter trees along the property line. Done. She thought about what done felt like. Not like winning a fight. Not like that at all. More like the end of a long structural assessment. Like when you've gone through every wall of a house and checked every joint and can finally say with certainty, the bones are good. Everything that needs to hold is holding. Thank you, Philip, she said. Owen did the work, Crane said. I just made sure it held. She drove home. She told Audrey that evening. Not the legal architecture. The shape. Boyd was done. Constance knew. Roland was handling his end. The Caldwell house was fully and cleanly hers. Audrey sat across the table and listened without moving. When Helen finished, Audrey was quiet for a moment. Is it strange, she said, that I feel something like sorry for Constance? Helen looked at her. No, she said. It's just honest. She lost Owen, and then she almost lost everything else, because Boyd told her what she needed to hear. Audrey shook her head slowly. That's a particular kind of terrible. Being used by someone you love. Yes. Do you feel sorry for her? Helen considered that honestly. I feel something in that direction, she said. I don't have the right word for it yet. Give me a few weeks. Audrey smiled. Small and real. They sat in the kitchen together after that. The record player was going upstairs from earlier. Something slow and quiet that came through the ceiling like background weather. Outside, Caldwell Street was dark and still, and entirely theirs. I want to ask you something, Audrey said. Go ahead. The fund. She turned her mug in her hands. Owen supported my work through it for 3 years without telling me, without letting me know the source. Yes. I've been thinking about why he did it that way. Specifically that way. She looked up. He wanted me to know I could do it. Not that he believed I could, that I actually could. By myself. That the work was good enough on its own terms. A pause. If I'd known it was him, I would have always wondered whether I got it because of the art, or because of the family. Yes, Helen said. He took that question away before I could ask it. That was very Owen. Audrey was quiet. I want to do that, she said. In the fund. Whatever role I have going forward, I want to find the people who are right at the edge of something real, and make sure the work gets seen without them knowing who's behind it. She looked at Helen directly. Is that what the fund is for? Helen looked at this 27-year-old woman who had driven 9 hours when her father died and never left. Who had held boards while Helen nailed them and carried canvases in bed sheets and made chamomile at midnight and said, "You know what you're doing. Go to sleep." "That is exactly what the fund is for," Helen said. Audrey nodded, like something had been officially decided, which it had. January. She named it the Garrett Owen Fund. Not Owen's alone, not hers alone, both of them. Crane had expected Owen's name first. She'd said no. "He built it," she said. "I'm running it. That's a partnership. My name goes first because I'm the one here." Crane had been quiet a moment. Then he would have argued about it. "He would have wanted my name first," Helen said, and then argued that he'd wanted it that way all along. Crane had smiled. She could hear it. "You're right. He would have." The paperwork was filed on the 14th of January. The first grant cycle opened in February. Audrey designed the announcement. Clean. Simple. The kind of design that communicated seriousness without self-importance. The fund would support 3 things. Estelle's program for women rebuilding independent lives, an arts grant for working artists without gallery affiliations, and a classroom materials fund for teachers whose districts underfunded their rooms. The last one had been Faye's idea. Helen had added it to the list without deliberating. Faye came in the last week of January. Just Faye, good visit, no agenda. They sat on the porch because Helen said the steps were holding beautifully through the freeze-thaw cycles, and she wanted Faye to appreciate the engineering. Faye said it was 26 degrees, and she was appreciating it from inside her coat and a scarf that covered most of her face, and that was the extent of her architectural interest. They sat outside anyway. "The fund," Faye said after a while. "Estelle's program, is it going to keep running the same way?" "Estelle knows it better than anyone," Helen said. "I'm not going to reorganize something that works. What I can do is make sure it stays funded and grows if she wants to grow it. She'll want to grow it." "That's what I thought. And you're keeping the teaching?" 2 days a week, maybe 3. Helen looked at Caldwell Street. January version. Everything stripped to structure. No color, no softness. Just the lines of things. The bones. "I spent 33 years teaching because it was my job and I loved it. Now it's not my job. Now I'll teach because I love it, and that's the only reason." She paused. "It feels different. Cleaner. It sounds like it. And the rest of the time goes to the fund." Helen looked at Faye. "To something Owen built. Something we built, I see that now. I thought I didn't know about it, but I was in it the whole time. He built it around me." Faye was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He really was something." "He was." Helen looked back at the street. "He wasn't perfect. He should have told me about the patent. He should have told me about Estelle years ago. He kept things he should have shared." She said it plainly, not with bitterness, just the accurate accounting of a person she had known fully. "I've thought about whether that was the right call. And I think he made the call he believed was right, for the reasons he believed were right, and some of those reasons were good, and some of them were him being slightly too careful, slightly too afraid that knowing would change something." A pause. "I would have wanted to know. If he'd asked me, I would have told him to just tell me, but knowing it now, after proving I could do it without knowing." She looked at the bare maple. "There's something in that too. Something I couldn't have gotten the other way." Faye turned her mug in her hands. "You've been thinking about this a lot," she said. "I've had a quiet winter." Faye laughed. The street was cold and empty, and the January light was the cleanest light of the year. Helen looked at it and thought it was one of the better afternoons she'd had since October. There was a letter from Constance in early February. Not long. Constance was not someone who wrote long letters. She chose words the way she chose everything, with deliberateness. Nothing wasted. Nothing performed. It said, "I have been thinking about what Owen wrote, about the difference between holding on and holding. I have not always understood that difference. I am trying to learn it now. That is all I have to offer at the moment. But I thought you should know." Below that, one more line. "If you would be willing to have coffee sometime, I would come to Caldwell Street." Helen read it twice. She stood in her kitchen and looked at it. She thought about 31 years of Thanksgiving tables and hospital waiting rooms, and the particular managed distance that had been the texture of their relationship. She thought about Constance on the front walk in her good coat, and the watching her watch, and the "it's not personal." She thought about a woman in a sitting room, reading a letter from her dead son for the first time. She thought, I would be willing. Not because 31 years got resolved by a letter. Not because things would become simple. Not because she and Constance would become something they had never been. But because Constance was trying. And because Owen would have been willing. And because Helen was, at her core, the kind of person who did not turn away from something genuinely trying to be honest. She wrote back that afternoon. Brief. Warm enough to mean it. She said, come on a Saturday. I'll make coffee. Spring. April. The garden woke up on a Tuesday. She hadn't expected much the first year. You can't undo years of neglect in one season. You plant and you tend and you wait, and sometimes things come back and sometimes you try again. She had told herself this through all of March while she amended the soil and cut back the dead growth and planned without expecting. But April was generous. The coneflowers came back along the east bed. The baptisia, the big woody one in the corner, that Estelle said had been there 15 years, put up new growth in a week. Something that turned out to be volunteer dill came up in the vegetable section from seeds that had been waiting in the soil since before Helen arrived. Seeds that had been there all along. Waiting. Audrey came out on an afternoon in mid-April and stood beside Helen and looked at the beds. It's working, Audrey said. With a note of genuine surprise she immediately tried to correct. I thought it would. It's different when you see it, Helen said. Audrey crouched down to look at the baptisia. Estelle said this has been coming back for 15 years, apparently. Through all those years when nobody was tending it. Through all of them. Audrey stood back up, looked at the whole garden. Good roots, she said. Good roots, Helen agreed. They stood in the April sun, and the garden was quiet and purposeful around them. And the apple tree at the center had come back too, not dramatically, just certainly, the way things come back when their roots are deep enough. Estelle came to dinner in April. This had become a regular arrangement without anyone deciding it was one. Estelle at the back door at 6 with something in a dish towel, or Audrey texting her, or Helen calling to say she'd been past the butcher. The rhythm of it existed before any of them named it. They ate at the kitchen table. The mismatched chairs, leveled perfectly by Audrey with folded cardstock under one leg, which had bothered Helen for 2 weeks before she accepted that it worked fine. They talked about the garden, about the fund's first grant applications, which had come in from 11 different women, about Estelle's plans for expanding the summer sessions, about an application from a woman in Columbus who was starting over at 64 and had written in her cover letter, I am not asking for charity. I am asking for the thing that is one step before charity, which is the chance to figure out what I can do. Helen had read that line 3 times. She'll get it, she said. Her application is the clearest I've read. She knows what she needs and she can say why. Owen would have spotted her immediately, Estelle said. Owen would have already known her somehow, Audrey said. He'd have driven over with something useful before she knew she needed it. Estelle laughed. Helen laughed. The kitchen was warm and easy, and outside the April evening was softening the last edges of a long winter. Helen looked at the two of them across the table. Estelle, who had held a space open and made coffee without asking, and told her to look at the bones. Audrey, who had driven 9 hours and never left, and carried canvases, and taken the folder at midnight, and designed a fund announcement that said exactly the right thing. She thought about what she had. Not the legal summary of it. Not Crane's folder, or the trust provisions, or the $2.4 million, structured carefully across 12 years of planning. The thing underneath all of that. The thing that had no document. 31 years of a man who loved her so specifically that the shape of his love was designed to protect her from feeling protected. Audrey across a table. Estelle at a kitchen counter with strong coffee before 9. Faye on the phone on a Friday. Pete Harmon at a register not explaining things that didn't need explaining. Kevin Harmon saying to tell Estelle hello. All of it. Still here. All of it remaining. Later. The dishes were done. Estelle had gone through the garden gate the way she always went, because the gate was closer than the front door. And Estelle had opinions about efficiency that Helen had stopped questioning. Audrey was upstairs, the record player going, barely audible, the right kind of quiet. Helen went out to the porch. She sat in the chair that had become her chair. the one angled toward the street to catch the last of the evening light. She had not planned for it to become her chair. It had simply become it the way things become theirs through repetition and choice, and the particular comfort of returning to the same place and finding it still there. She reached into her jacket pocket. Owen's ring. She had carried it since October. Not wearing it, it had always been too large for her fingers. It had always been his. But carrying it, in whatever coat she wore, a specific weight. The weight of a thing that mattered and would keep mattering. She held it in her palm. Didn't turn it. Just held it. The maple out front was in full leaf now, the bright particular green of things that have just returned to themselves. A neighbor she recognized walked a dog she knew by sight but not by name. She would learn the name. She would learn it because she was going to be here. Not passing through. Not surviving until something else happened. Here. This was her street. This was her house. Not because a document confirmed it. Because she had fixed the porch steps and sealed the attic gap and caulked the bathroom window and stood in the garden in November and planned what it would be in April. Because she had sat on this porch in October and November and December and January and February and March and now April and knew exactly what the light did in each of them. Because she had made it hers. The way you make anything yours. By showing up. By doing the work. By staying when leaving would have been easier. She closed her hand around the ring. Owen, she thought. Look at this. Look at what you built. Look at what held. She sat on the porch of her house on Caldwell Street as the April light went from gold to lavender to the particular dark blue of a spring evening that has decided to be beautiful about it. She listened to the record player through the upstairs window. She thought about the garden. She thought about what it would look like in June. She planned to be there for it. She put the ring back in her pocket. She stayed on the porch a little longer. Because she could. Because it was hers. Because this all of it, every repaired and replanted and quietly tended inch of it, was what remained when everything else had been taken or tested or set aside. The bones. The good work done quietly and left to hold. Her husband's love for her, shaped like a lock that didn't stick. Her own hands that had learned, across one long hard year, that they were more capable than she'd known. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything that mattered. And it was going to be there in the morning. May arrived the way good things sometimes do, without announcement. You look up one morning, and something has shifted in the light and the air, and you realize that what was coming has arrived without you noticing the exact moment it got there. Helen noticed it on a Tuesday in the garden. She had started going out before 7, which was not a habit she had planned for. It had simply begun one morning in late April when she woke before the alarm, and found herself in the kitchen before the coffee finished, and then, for no reason she could have explained, outside with her mug walking the beds in the early grey light. She had done it the next morning, and the one after that. Now it was Tuesday in May and she was doing it again, and the coneflowers along the east bed were taller than last week, and the baptisia had opened, and the volunteer dill had colonized a corner it had clearly decided was its own. She stood at the apple tree and looked back at the house, kitchen light on. Audrey, who had become an early riser over the winter without either of them discussing it, probably already at the table with her sketchbook. The window over the sink she'd resealed in November, holding clean against the spring rain. The back door in the color Audrey had called Not Quite Blue, which Helen had eventually decided was the most accurate name for it, and had stopped trying to find another. She looked at the house the way she'd learned to look at the garden, not for problems, just to see it, to know what the day had brought. It was not a remarkable house. The shutters she'd repainted in March needed a second coat on one of them already. The fence was functional, not beautiful. The porch steps were solid and level, and built to last, but they were not the steps of a house that made anyone slow down on the street. None of that was the point. She went inside. Audrey looked up from the sketchbook long enough to lift her mug. Helen refilled her own and sat down across from her, and they stayed like that for a few minutes, each occupied, not needing to fill the quiet. She thought, this is a life. Not a life reassembled. Not a life rebuilt from something broken, just a life, present tense, with coffee and morning light, and a person across the table who understood when talking was necessary and when it wasn't. She thought Owen would have liked this exactly. Not the circumstances that led to it, The thing itself. The first Garrett Owen Fund grants were awarded the second week of May. 11 applications had come in. Helen and Audrey reviewed them over 3 evenings at the kitchen table, with Estelle joining the second evening by phone, because she had specific opinions about 2 of the applications and was not going to withhold them on the grounds that she hadn't been officially invited to the process. 6 were funded. The woman from Columbus got one. Her name was Patricia, 64 years old, 37 years as a bookkeeper for a company that had restructured 2 years ago and eliminated her position, and then expressed surprise, or what passed for it, when she couldn't immediately find a comparable work. She had written in her cover letter, in plain language without apology, "I am not asking for charity. I am asking for the thing that comes before charity, which is the chance to figure out what I can do." Helen had read that sentence 4 times before she moved on. They sent the letter on a Wednesday. Patricia called on Thursday. Helen happened to be sitting at the kitchen table when the phone rang. She answered it, which she didn't usually do. They'd set up a voicemail that Audrey managed, but the phone was in front of her, and she picked it up. "I'm calling about the letter," Patricia said. Her voice was careful in the way of someone who has learned to be careful about hope. "Yes," Helen said. "I wanted to make sure it was real." Helen was quiet for a moment. She thought about Audrey at 23. On the phone with Owen, laughing, saying, "I can't believe it. I actually got it." And Owen saying, "You deserve it." Already knowing. Saying nothing more than that. "It's real," Helen said. "Because I've been trying for 2 years and people have been, they mean well. But starting over at my age is something people seem to find." Patricia stopped. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to confirm. It's real," Helen said again. "And Patricia, you wrote that you're not asking for charity. You were right, you're not. You're asking for a tool. That's a different thing entirely, and you already understood the difference. That's part of why we said yes." A silence.
"Thank you," Patricia said.
Helen held the phone after she hung up and sat at the kitchen table and thought about a man who had understood, before she did, that the most useful thing money could do was remove obstacles from people already doing the work. She thought, "I understand now. All of it. I finally understand all of it." Constance came on a Saturday in May, 10:15, exactly when she'd said, because Constance Voss had never in her life arrived at any other time than when she said she would. Spring coat, not the charcoal one. Hair set. The posture it had always been. But something underneath was different. Something had settled. Not softened exactly. Settled. The way a house settles when it has decided what it is and stops making noise about it. Helen had been thinking about this visit in the weeks since Constance's letter, thinking about what to say and what not to, how to be in the room with a woman she had spent 31 years at measured distance from. She had decided in the end to make the coffee and let the morning be what it was. She opened the door. Constance looked at her. "Come in," Helen said. Audrey had taken herself to phase with the quiet deliberateness of someone who understood what a room needed without being asked. Helen led Constance to the kitchen, poured coffee, set out the things she'd bought from the bakery, sat down. Constance looked at the kitchen, the hooks for coats, the narrow table Audrey had painted. The floor Helen had refinished herself over 2 weekends with more patience than she'd known she had. She didn't say anything about the house. Helen was glad. "Roland asked me to tell you," Constance said after they'd sat for a moment. "He read what Owen built, the whole trust. He read it carefully and he said," a pause, "he said he was proud of Owen. He wanted you to know he said that." Helen thought about Roland in the sitting room, the voice of a man who had decided something and was not going to unmake the decision. "Tell him thank you," she said. "I will." Constance held her mug with both hands. "And Boyd." Helen waited. Roland spoke with him directly. "Boyd will handle his own debts. There's no family trust money involved. Roland was very clear about that." She paused. "Boyd has also given up the executor role. We've brought in someone from Braddock's firm to manage the estate properly." "All right," Helen said. "I want you to know I'm not pretending that resolves everything." Constance looked at her. What Boyd did was a betrayal. Of you. Of this family. The word sat between them, quiet and specific. "I am still understanding the full size of it." "That takes time," Helen said. "Yes." A silence. Then, "May I ask you something?" "Yes." "The letter Owen wrote me. He said I controlled things instead of people, as if there was a difference. She looked at her hands on the table. I've been sitting with that since December. What he meant, a pause. I think he meant that managing things was a way of being necessary without being available, without the risk of actually being seen. Helen listened. If I managed the arrangements and the occasions and the logistics, I was essential. And if I was essential, I was safe. Constance looked up. It's efficient, as a strategy. It's also lonely. It is, Helen said, and it doesn't work. Because people don't feel loved. They feel handled. Helen held her coffee. She thought about 31 years of organized Christmases and managed guest lists. About what all of that must have cost underneath. Owen felt loved, she said. Whatever was complicated between you, he never doubted that you loved him. Not once. She paused. He just wished you would let him love you back without it needing to be negotiated. Constance closed her eyes, opened them. He said something like that. In the letter. I thought he probably had. They sat with that for a moment. Then Constance reached across the table and put her hand over Helen's. Not long. A moment. The contact brief and real. Then she picked up her coffee again. I'd like to come back, she said. Not on a schedule. Just sometimes. Helen thought about it honestly. Not whether to say yes, but what yes would actually mean going forward. Yes, she said. Come in June. The garden will be worth seeing in June. He built those beds, Constance said. Not a question. Just placing him in the space. Giving him somewhere to be. He did, Helen said. Estelle showed me where. The May morning came through the windows. The kitchen was warm. The coffee was strong, and neither of them said anything for a while. And it was, Helen thought, the first silence she had ever sat in with Constance Voss, that did not need to be filled. She counted that. In late May, Faye organized a dinner. Small. Her table. 6 people: Helen, Audrey, Dottie Marsh, Gloria Hendricks, and a woman named Bea Calloway, whom Faye had been working toward introducing since January on the grounds that they were, as Faye put it, the same person born 15 years apart. Bea was 46. She had retired 3 months ago from 30 years of hospital nursing and had the quality of someone who had seen enough in those years to have arrived somewhere past several kinds of naivety without being hardened by the arrival. She was direct. She had the economy of motion of someone who had spent decades making decisions in situations that did not allow for wasted effort. I heard about the fund, she said over dinner. Faye told me. Faye tells the right people, Helen said. Only, Faye said, from the other end of the table, without looking up. The combination you chose, Bea said. The women's program and the arts grant. I've been thinking about it since Faye mentioned it. She set down her fork. In my last years at the hospital, we had patients, women mostly, a certain age coming through health crises, and the health crisis was almost secondary. The real crisis was infrastructure. They'd been everyone else's infrastructure for 20, 30 years, and when they needed it themselves, there was nothing there. Helen looked at her. Nothing coordinated, Bea continued. Individual kindness, which is not nothing, but it's not reliable and it doesn't scale. She picked up her glass. I'm thinking about what comes next for me, whether there's something that addresses that specific gap, not a new organization, a connector, something that makes the things that already exist talk to each other. Come to Caldwell Street, Helen said. Bring what you're thinking. We'll sit in the garden. Something opened in Bea's face. That's it? She said. That's how things start, Helen said, with a conversation, and then with the next one. Faye, at the other end of the table, let herself look satisfied for exactly 1 second before returning to her plate. Helen noticed. She said nothing. June arrived and the garden arrived with it. The coneflowers fully open along the east bed, orange and rust, and a deep yellow she had come to think of as the color of things that know what they are. The baptisia taking up space with the confidence of something that had been deciding to do this for 15 years. The volunteer dill, staking its claim to the corner it had chosen. The apple tree in full leaf, doing what it had apparently always done. Persisting. Producing. Deciding each spring that it had more to offer. Constance came on a Saturday morning. She had come twice before since May, each visit a little more comfortable than the one before, each one teaching both of them something they couldn't have predicted about what this might become. Not friendship exactly. Not the version of it they might have had if things had been different from the beginning. Something else. A relationship that had been forced to find its true dimensions by circumstance, and that was discovering, carefully, what those dimensions were. She came through the garden gate this time, not the front door. Helen noticed but didn't remark on it. He put the beds here, Constance said, standing at the edge of the garden looking at it. Not a question. Placing Owen in the space. Estelle showed me where. Constance walked to the baptisia, looked at it the way she looked at things she was taking seriously. I remember him talking about this one. He said it had opinions about the soil. He wasn't wrong. Constance stood with it for a moment. Then she turned to the apple tree. He climbed one like this when he was 6, at the old house. Fell out and broke 2 fingers and climbed back up the next day. She paused. I told Roland it was either courageous or foolish. Roland said it was both, and that was Owen exactly. Helen looked at the tree. A 6-year-old Owen with 2 broken fingers going back up. She thought, yes, that is Owen exactly. Roland would like to come sometime, Constance said. If that would be all right. Tell him any Saturday, Helen said. Tell him to come whenever he wants. Constance nodded. She looked at the garden a while longer in the way of someone learning to look at something rather than manage it. Then she reached into her bag. I found something, she said. Going through Owen's things at the house. His things specifically, not the family pieces. She took out a small frame. Estelle sent it to him years ago. He kept it in his study. Helen took the frame. A photograph she had never seen. Owen at maybe 45. Standing in an earlier version of this garden, fewer beds. The apple tree considerably smaller. The fence new and not yet rusted. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at something off to the side, the expression he wore when he was absorbed in a problem. In one hand, a trowel. The other hand cupped around something small that the photo didn't quite resolve. Her husband in her garden before it was her garden. Making it ready. Thank you, Helen said. She said it the way you say something when the word is larger than it looks and you trust the other person to hear what's inside it. Constance, to her credit, heard it. Estelle's summer program opened the 2nd week of June. 12 women in the community room of the library, 2 blocks from Caldwell. Long tables, inadequate lighting, good acoustics. Estelle had chosen the room on purpose. She said, if the chairs were comfortable, people spent energy on the chairs. Helen went to the first session, not to help run it, just to be there, to sit in the back and see what Owen had been building toward for 9 years. The women ranged from 51 to 73. Different specifics, different losses, different roads to this room. What they had in common was that the scaffolding had come away, and they were figuring out what they could actually stand on. Estelle stood at the front with the posture of someone who had run rooms for a long time and had stopped needing the room to cooperate. We start with the practical, she said, because that's what everyone says they need, and they're right. Knowing how to read a contract matters. Knowing who to call when the furnace stops matters. She looked around the table. But the practical is not the real thing we're here for. The real thing is this. You are all in the middle of finding out what you're actually made of. And it turns out to be more than you thought. A pause. That's what I've seen in 12 years of doing this every time. Helen sat in the back and watched. She thought about the legal pad. The first list. 3 items. The porch steps and the kitchen faucet and the bathroom caulking. She thought about 8 months of finding out what she was made of. She thought, Estelle is right. It was more than she thought. There was a moment in late June that Helen had not planned for and did not see coming. Audrey's second show opened on a Thursday evening at a gallery on the north side of the city. Small space, serious reputation. The kind of gallery that made decisions about work on the basis of the work and not much else. Helen had asked Crane directly, before the opening, whether any Garrett Owen Fund money had gone to this gallery or anyone connected to it. It hadn't. This one was Audrey's on her own terms. The work was different from what came before. Not the technique that was recognizably hers, the layering and the particular way she handled light. But something in the register had changed. The earlier paintings had been careful in a way Helen had always thought of as restraint, but now understood was closer to holding back. These paintings were not holding back. One of the November garden, the raised beds under frost, the apple tree bare, the yard stripped to its structure. Honest, A garden that knew exactly what it was in its hardest month and was not explaining itself about it. One of Estelle on the porch, coffee in hand, looking at something off to the side. The expression, the particular look of someone so thoroughly done, with being impressed by things that aren't worth it, caught exactly right. One called May, the kitchen on Caldwell Street. Table, 2 mugs, 2 chairs, the east window light at the morning angle. No people in the scene. Just the evidence of people. The clear implication that someone had just been there and would be back. Helen stood in front of it for a long time. Audrey appeared at her elbow. "You're not supposed to cry at your own family member's opening," Audrey said. "The other buyers think something's wrong with the work." "Nothing is wrong with the work," Helen said. "I know." Audrey looked at the painting. "I painted it the morning after you told me about the grant. About Owen." A pause. "I needed somewhere to put the feeling. That was the place." Helen looked at the 2 mugs on the table. The angle of the light. "It's the best thing you've made," she said. "I think so too." Audrey was quiet for a moment. "It's the first time I painted the whole thing. Not just the part I thought was acceptable." The gallery filled over the next hour. Faye with Dottie and Gloria. Estelle, who stood in front of her own portrait for a long time before saying, to no one in particular, she got the cardigan right. Pete Harmon, whom Helen hadn't known Audrey had invited, moving through the paintings with the focused attentions of someone who understood structure and was looking for it. He found Helen near the end of the evening. "She sees things true," he said. "Owen said you did too." Helen stood in the gallery in the June evening and felt the weight of the year in the room around her. Not as a burden. The other kind of weight. The weight of things that have become solid. She looked at the painting called May. She looked at Audrey across the room, talking to someone with the ease of a person who had found their footing. She thought about a man who had looked at this girl at 23 and seen what she could be and made sure her work got in front of people who could see it, and then said nothing more than "you deserve it," and let her believe the world had recognized her on its own. He had been right about Audrey. He had been right about most things. She stayed until the end of the opening. She helped Audrey carry things to the car. They drove home on Caldwell Street with the windows down, and the June night coming through warm and the radio on low, and neither of them talking much, which was its own kind conversation. July. Bea Calloway came to Caldwell Street on a Wednesday afternoon. She came with a folder. She sat in the garden because the July heat required it, and the garden in July had become the place where things got decided. The baptisia full and confident. The coneflowers doing what they'd been built to do. The dill enormous and unbothered in its corner. What Bea had in the folder was organized and specific, and had clearly been developing for months, in the mind of a woman who had spent 30 years solving problems under pressure, and had brought all of that capacity to bear on something she genuinely cared about. The gap was real. Women coming through major transitions, health crises, loss, displacement, who needed coordinated support rather than individual luck. Not a new organization. A network. Estelle's practical skills program. The fund's financial floor. Something for the health navigation piece, which was where Bea came in. 3 things that existed separately, talking to each other. "I'm not proposing to run something," Bea said. "I'm proposing to connect things that should already be connected, which requires someone with enough time to actually do the connecting." Helen looked at the folder. She thought about the trust provision Crane had read her. For the expansion of programs that serve the fund's mission, as determined by the trustee. "Let's have a meeting," she said. "You, me, Estelle, Crane. See what the structure looks like when we put the pieces on the same table." Bea looked at her. "That's all?" "That's how things start," Helen said. "The same way every time. Someone brings what they know. Then the next person brings what they know. Then you see what you have." Bea picked up her glass of water. Looked at the apple tree at the center of the yard. "Owen built this?" she said. "The beds, the framework of it. What was it when you got here?" "Weeds," Helen said. "And underneath the weeds, the shape of something someone had already put in." Bea turned that over. She nodded slowly. The way someone does when an answer has landed on a different question than the one they asked. Which it had. The meeting happened in August. Helen's kitchen. The mismatched chairs. Estelle, Bea, Crane, Audrey, and Faye, who had not been specifically invited, but had heard about it and arrived with pastries and the reasonable position that someone needed to take notes. They talked for 3 hours, not linearly. The way good working conversations go spiraling back to the same points from different angles, each pass adding something the last one couldn't see. By the end they had an outline, not a finished thing. The shape of what a finished thing could be. Estelle said, near the end, this is what Owen was trying to get to. He just didn't have the people in the room at the same time. Helen thought about that, about a man who had worked in pieces quietly, across years, who had, as far as she knew, never sat at a table and said, here is the full shape of what I'm building. Here is how the parts connect. Maybe he hadn't known the full shape. Maybe some things only become visible when the people who hold the pieces are finally in the same room at the same time. She thought, he started it. We're finishing it. Faye's notes from the meeting ran to 4 pages, included 3 suggestions that had not come from the meeting itself, but which Faye felt were so obvious as to be mandatory, and contained one marginal comment that read simply, this is good, we should do this faster. Helen kept all of it. August moved through with the particular confidence of a month that knows it's the last of something. The garden reached its peak and held it, and then began at the edges to complete itself. The coneflowers going to seed, the dill finishing, the corner it had claimed left open for whatever chose it next. Helen found herself in the garden in the evenings more often, not working, standing in it, the way Owen had stood at the kitchen counter not needing anything, just choosing to be where something good was happening. She understood that now, what he had been doing all those mornings. On an evening in the 3rd week of August, she stood in the garden and looked at the apple tree and thought about the evening in October when she had stood in the empty living room on Caldwell Street with Estelle's coffee and thought, all right, this is where it starts. The first list. 3 items. Porch steps, kitchen faucet, bathroom caulking. What had been added to the list since then? The attic gap, the bathroom paint, the soil amendments for the beds, the grant applications, the meeting in August. Everything that had grown from one address written on a folded piece of paper, left in a locked drawer on a red ribbon. She thought, Owen, you prepared the ground. She thought, look at what found its way up through it. She went inside before it got fully dark. September. The expanded program launched quietly in the first week of the month. 6 women in the first cohort. Referred through Estelle's network, through Bia's contacts at the hospital, through Crane's mention to a colleague in family law. Different situations, different losses, different specifics. What they held in common, the scaffolding had come away, and they were doing the work of finding out what they could actually stand on. Patricia from Columbus was in the cohort. Helen did not tell her she'd been the one to answer the phone in February. That wasn't information that needed to be shared. What mattered was that Patricia was there, 7 months later, at the beginning of something rather than in the middle of not knowing where the beginning was. Helen went to the first session, sat in the back. Bia ran the opening segment, healthcare navigation. What to do when you're suddenly the one making all the decisions, who to call and what to ask and how to read what you're being given. She said it with the directness of someone who had watched too many people arrive without this information and had decided she was not going to be someone who withheld it. By the end of the session, the 12 women around the table were talking to each other. Not just to the facilitators, to each other. Helen recognized the sound of it. A room finding itself. People discovering that the specific thing they thought was theirs alone to carry had a name, and that name was in the room with them. She drove home on Caldwell Street. She sat on the front steps, the porch steps, level and solid, going nowhere, and let the September evening come down around her. She thought about what a year was. October to September. The moving truck and the flannel shirt and Constance checking her watch. The empty rooms and Estelle's coffee and the key on the red ribbon. The legal pad and Boyd's letters and the folder labeled Boyd's nonsense in plain handwriting on the kitchen counter. Crane's office and the chair with the worn armrest and the coffee stain on the filing cabinet. Audrey with the caulk gun. Pete Harmon handing over lumber without explaining it. Faye arriving with people on Saturday. The raised beds under November frost. The April garden waking up as if it had been deciding to the whole time. She thought about Patricia on the phone, checking that the letter was real. She thought about Constance's hand over hers, brief and real. She thought about Roland at the apple tree in July, speaking to the tree and not to her. He was a good man. My son was a good, she had said. Yes, he was. And Roland had nodded, and they had stood there in the summer garden, and it had been enough. She thought about the full shape of the year, what it had required, what it had given back. She reached into her jacket pocket. Owen's ring. A year she had carried it. Same weight in the same pocket through every season since October. The grief and the work and the December that asked everything of her, and the January that was its own kind of hard, and the spring that opened up, and the summer that was full. She held it in her palm. She thought, Owen, you knew I would find the key. You knew I would drive to Caldwell Street and try the lock and stand in the empty living room and think, all right, this is where it starts. You knew because you had known me for 31 years, and you had paid attention the whole time. You oiled the lock in April because you were that specific about it. You put the address on a red ribbon because you wanted it to feel like something, not like a document. You built the raised beds 9 years ago because Estelle needed them, and because someday someone else would too. You prepared the ground, and then you got out of the way, and trusted me to know what to do with it. She held the ring and looked at the street. The maple out front had started its turn, just at the outer edges of the leaves, the first announcement of October coming. The evening was clear and cooling, and a neighbor she now knew by name walked a dog she also now knew by name, and the woman lifted a hand in the easy way of people who have become familiar without ceremony. Helen lifted a hand back. She heard Audrey through the open window upstairs. The record player, something slow and recognizable now, after a year of hearing it come through the ceiling. Audrey's voice briefly, talking to someone on the phone, laughing at something. She heard Estelle's gait, the familiar sound of it, the slight catch and release. Estelle cutting through the garden on her evening walk. She heard Faye's car 2 blocks away, the driver's side window with its particular rattle that Faye refused to fix, because the car was giving her driving advice and she was choosing to take it. All of it. Present, here. Hers. The record player, the gate, the rattling window, the neighbor's hand in the evening light, the ring in her palm. She closed her hand around it. She thought about what remained when everything else had been tested. Not a list of things. Not the house, though the house was solid and full of good work done with her own hands. Not the fund, though the fund was real and doing what Owen had imagined, and more than he'd imagined. Not the garden, though she would be in it before 7 tomorrow morning, walking the beds in the early light. What remained was simpler than any of those things and harder to name. The way a year of showing up had taught her what she was made of. The way grief, which she had expected only to take things, had also cleared things, had stripped away what wasn't essential and left the structure visible. The way Owen's love for her had been the whole time, shaped like preparation. Not protection, not provision, preparation. The oiled lock and the red ribbon and the raised beds and the 7 months standing at the kitchen counter, looking at her across the room while he made sure everything was in place. The way she had received that love and was now passing it forward in the only form that made sense to her as a tool, as infrastructure, as the thing that comes before charity, which is the chance to figure out what you can do. She sat on the porch steps for a while. The September dark came in fully, and the street lights on Caldwell came on one by one, and the maple was just a shape against the sky, its edges uncertain in the dark, but its presence not. She put the ring back in her pocket. She stood up. She went inside. She said goodnight to Audrey, who was still at the table, and who looked up and said goodnight back with the ease of a person who has found somewhere she belongs. Helen made tea. She was doing that now, some evenings, instead of the last cup of coffee. Owen would have found this significant and worth discussing. She was choosing to let it be a small thing. She sat at the table. She thought about tomorrow, the garden in the morning, the second cohort application deadline coming, the meeting with Crane about the fund's 2nd year, the question Bia had raised about whether the program needed a name separate from the fund, which Helen had been thinking about and had not yet decided. She thought about Constance coming in October. They had agreed on it, without making it formal, just a conversation that had ended with both of them knowing the other one would show up. Helen had decided she would have the coffee ready and let Constance see the garden in the October version of it, the beds going quiet, the apple tree beginning to let go of its leaves. She thought about what it would look like. She thought about Owen, who had built those beds 9 years ago on a Saturday he called errands, who had come home and stood at the kitchen counter while she made dinner and not mentioned a word of it, who had simply added it to the list of things he was putting in place. She rinsed the mug. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked through the house, her house, solid and honestly imperfect, holding what it had been asked to hold, and she thought, tomorrow the garden, tomorrow the work, tomorrow whatever the day brings. She had what she needed. She had learned what she was made of. She had done what the year asked of her, and the ground was good. She had known that since April. Since the coneflowers came back along the east bed, and the baptisia put up new growth, and the dill arrived from seeds no one had planted since before she lived here, the ground was good. Owen had made sure of it. And she had learned across one long year of showing up and staying that the trust he had placed in her, the trust shaped like a key on a red ribbon and an address on a folded piece of paper and a lock oiled in April so it wouldn't stick, had been earned. She went to bed. The house settled around her the way it did, quietly, steadily, doing what it had been built to do. Outside, Caldwell Street held the September night. The maple stood in front, the apple tree stood in back, and somewhere between the two of them the house, with the newly painted door, and the level porch steps, and the kitchen where the afternoon light came in, best contained a woman who had spent a year finding out that she was more than she'd needed to be before. She slept. The morning would come, and she would be in the garden before the rest of the street was awake, coffee in hand, walking the beds in the early light. She would see what the night had brought. She would make a note of it. She would know what to do.